The stagecoach driver left them to die in the blizzard. 2 women, no horses, no hope. When the snow cleared enough to see death coming, Nora Whitfield made peace with God. Then hoofbeats shattered the silence. A cowboy emerged from the white hell, and everything changed. This is the story of abandonment, survival, and a love born in the coldest night of 1874. Stay until the end and comment what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. The wind screamed like something alive and furious. Nora Whitfield pressed herself against the overturned stagecoach, her fingers so numb she couldn't tell if she was still gripping the splintered wood or if her hands had simply frozen to it. Snow drove horizontally across the Nebraska prairie, each flake a tiny blade cutting exposed skin. She'd lost feeling in her feet an hour ago, or was it 2 hours? Time had become as shapeless as the white void surrounding her. "Miss Whitfield?" The voice beside her was barely audible over the wind's roar. "Miss Whitfield, I can't feel my legs." Nora turned her head with agonizing slowness. Agatha Rowe lay crumpled against the coach's undercarriage, her traveling dress soaked through, ice crystals forming in her graying hair. Blood had frozen in a dark line down the older woman's temple where she'd struck her head when the coach overturned. "Stay awake, Agatha." Nora's words came out slurred, her lips too stiff to form proper shapes. "You have to stay awake. So tired." "No, look at me." Nora reached out, her hand moving as though through deep water, and gripped Agatha's shoulder. The older woman's eyes fluttered open, unfocused, the pupils different sizes. "Tell me about your daughter again, Sarah. Tell me about Sarah." Agatha's cracked lips moved. "Sarah, she's waiting in California." "That's right. She's waiting for you. You're going to see her. You're going to meet your grandson." Nora squeezed harder, trying to transfer warmth, life, will, anything to keep those eyes open. "What's his name again?" "Thomas. Little Thomas." A ghost of a smile. "He'll be, 2 years old now." "You're going to hold him, Agatha. You hear me? You're going to hold that boy." But even as Nora spoke the words, she felt the lie in them. They were going to die here, both of them. Frozen solid against an overturned stagecoach in the middle of nowhere, their bodies probably not found until spring thaw. If then, the blizzard had come out of nowhere, or rather, it had come exactly as the locals in Omaha had predicted, and exactly as the stagecoach driver had ignored. Nora remembered the warnings at the station, remembered the worried looks exchanged by the station master and his wife. "Mr. Winters," the station master had said, his weathered face grave, "that storm's going to hit by mid-afternoon. You'd best wait it out here." Orrin Winters had laughed, his young face cocky with the invincibility of 22 years. "I've driven through worse. These ladies have paid for passage, and passage they'll get." "Orrin, my brother might coddle passengers, but I don't. We leave in 10 minutes. Nora had felt the first stirrings of unease then. She'd traveled enough to know that experienced frontiersmen didn't dismiss weather warnings. They certainly didn't laugh at them. But she'd already waited 3 days for a coach heading west, in California, and the teaching position waiting for her there. Couldn't wait forever. So she'd climbed aboard. Agatha Rowe had settled beside her, chattering nervously about her daughter and grandson. 2 other passengers, a traveling salesman and a gruff prospector, had taken the rear-facing seats. And Orrin Winters had cracked his whip, sending the 6-horse team lurching forward into a day that had seemed bright and clear. For about 2 hours. The sky had darkened with shocking speed, the temperature plummeting so fast Nora had actually seen her breath freeze in midair. Within minutes, the wind had picked up, carrying with it walls of snow that reduced visibility to nothing. "Mr. Winters!" the salesman had shouted up at the driver's box. "Mr. Winters, we need to stop." "Can't stop in this," Winters had yelled back. "Have to push through." But you couldn't push through a Nebraska blizzard. The storm had proven that with brutal efficiency. Nora still didn't understand exactly what had happened. One moment the coach had been rocking violently, the horses screaming in panic. The next, everything had tilted sideways. She remembered flying through the air, remembered the bone-jarring impact, remembered screaming as the world tumbled around her. When she'd finally stopped moving, She'd found herself half buried in a snowdrift, her ears ringing, her left shoulder blazing with pain. The coach lay on its side 20 feet away, one wheel still spinning. Agatha had been thrown clear, lying motionless in the snow. The salesman. Nora shuddered, and not from the cold. The salesman had landed badly. She'd known it the moment she saw the angle of his neck. The prospector had vanished entirely, probably thrown into a ravine or gully, his body already buried under 3 feet of fresh snow. And Orrin Winters? She'd seen him exactly once after the crash. He'd appeared out of the white chaos, leading 3 of the surviving horses. His face had been pale, eyes wide with panic. "Where's my brother?" he'd shouted at her. "Where's Calder?" "Your brother?" Nora had stared at him in confusion, her thoughts muddy. "Your brother's not here. We need help. I have to find him. I have to." Winters had looked around wildly, then back at the horses, at the storm, at the overturned coach, at her. "I'm sorry," he'd said, and the words had been almost lost in the wind. "I'm sorry. I can't." And then he'd mounted one of the horses and disappeared into the blizzard, leading the other 2 behind him. He'd left them to die. Nora had screamed after him, her voice swallowed by the storm. She'd tried to stand, to run, to do something, but her legs had given out. By the time she'd managed to crawl to Agatha, to drag the unconscious woman to the minimal shelter of the overturned coach, Winters was long gone. That had been... She didn't know how long ago. Hours, certainly. Long enough for the feeling to leave her extremities. Long enough for the deadly drowsiness to start creeping in. "Miss Whitfield?" Agatha's voice was fainter now. I don't think... Don't. Nora forced her eyes wider, fighting the urge to let them drift shut. "Don't say it. Sarah needs to know. I loved her. I love her. You'll tell her yourself." Such a sweet girl. Agatha's eyes were closing. Tell her Mama loved..." "Agatha!" Nora shook the woman's shoulder, but there was no response. "Agatha, wake up! Wake up!" Nothing. Nora pressed 2 fingers against Agatha's neck, searching for a pulse. There. Faint, irregular, but there. Still alive. For now. "God!" Nora's voice cracked. "Please, if you're listening, we need... But what did they need? A miracle? Those didn't exist, not out here. Rescue? No one knew where they were. No one was looking. Winters had the horses. The storm showed no sign of letting up. They had no fire, no food, no shelter beyond the overturned coach that was already half buried in snow. They had nothing. Nora let her head fall back against the coach's side, staring up at the white sky. Snow hit her face, melted in the last warmth of her skin, then froze again. She wondered if this was how it ended. 26 years old, frozen to death in Nebraska, 100 miles from anywhere that mattered. She'd left Boston to escape a loveless engagement, had left behind society expectations and her mother's matchmaking and a future as the respectable wife of a respectable banker, had chosen freedom, adventure, a teaching position in California where she could be her own woman, and this was where freedom had brought her. "I'm sorry, Mama," she whispered to the storm. "You were right. I should have married Charles Ashford, should have stayed where I was safe." The wind howled in response, and Nora felt her eyes drifting closed. The drowsiness was overwhelming now, almost pleasant, like being wrapped in warm blankets, like sinking into a soft bed. She knew what it meant. This was how freezing to death felt. They'd warned her about it in Omaha. The station master's wife had seen it before, had told her that people in the final stages of hypothermia often felt warm, peaceful, that they smiled as they died. Nora didn't feel like smiling, but she did feel warm and tired. So tired. Her eyes closed. Somewhere far away she heard a sound. Hoofbeats maybe, or just her heart's final stuttering rhythm. A voice, deep and urgent, but the words were incomprehensible. Hands on her shoulders, rough and real, but that had to be a dream because there was no one out here. No one. Miss, can you hear me?" Nora tried to respond, but her mouth wouldn't work. The warm darkness was pulling her down, and she let it. God damn it, stay with me. The hands were shaking her now, and there was something in the voice, command maybe, or desperation. You don't get to die. Not today. Do you hear me? Not today. Something warm, impossibly warm, wrapped around her shoulders. Wool. A coat. She could smell it, leather and smoke and horse and man. There's two of them. The voice, male, definitely male, shouted into the wind. I need to. Christ, this one's in bad shape, barely breathing. Nora forced her eyes open to slits. A face swam into view above her, blurred by snow and her failing vision. She saw the shadow of a hat brim, saw eyes, pale, cold blue, but somehow burning, saw a jaw dark with stubble, a mouth set in grim determination. Who? She managed. Calder Boone. The man was lifting her now, strong arms scooping her up like she weighed nothing. And you're not dying today. That's a promise. The woman, Agatha, I see her. I'll get her too. But first I need to get you on my horse. The world tilted again, but this time there were arms holding her, keeping her safe. She felt herself being lifted onto something warm and alive. A horse, huge and solid beneath her. Then the man, Calder, was behind her, his body a wall of heat at her back, one arm locked around her waist. Hold on, he said into her ear. My cabin's not far, maybe half a mile. Hold on and keep breathing. Agatha, I'll come back for her. I swear to God I'll come back. But if I try to take you both now, we'll all die out here. Nora tried to protest, tried to insist they couldn't leave Agatha, but her voice had abandoned her. The darkness was coming back, warm and inviting. No, you don't. Calder's arm tightened around her, and she felt his breath against her ear. Stay awake. Talk to me. What's your name? Nora? Nora, good. I'm Calder. Where are you from, Nora? Boston. Boston? Long way from home. What brings a Boston girl to Nebraska in winter? She couldn't answer. Couldn't remember. All she could focus on was the warmth of the man behind her and the motion of the horse beneath her. They were moving. She could feel that much. Moving through the white hell towards something, somewhere. Salvation or death. She didn't know which. Stay with me, Nora. Calder's voice was low, steady, an anchor in the chaos. We're almost there. Just a little farther. Time fractured. Nora was aware of moments, disconnected snapshots, the horse's labored breathing, the burn of cold air in her lungs, Calder's hand rubbing her arm through the coat, trying to keep blood flowing. Then suddenly they were stopping, and Calder was dismounting, his hands reaching up to pull her down. Can you stand? She tried. Her legs buckled immediately. Calder caught her before she hit the ground, then simply lifted her again, cradling her against his chest as he carried her toward a cabin. Small, rough-hewn, half-buried in snow, but solid. Real. He kicked the door open and brought her inside, and the absence of wind was so sudden, so complete, that Nora gasped. There's a bed in the corner. Calder was moving as he spoke, his voice tight with urgency. I'm going to put you down, get this fire built up, then I have to go back for the other woman. Agatha. Agatha, right. He laid her on something soft. A mattress, covered in blankets and furs. Don't try to move. Don't try to take off those wet clothes yet. I know that sounds wrong, but if you warm up too fast, it'll kill you. Understand? Nora nodded, though she barely understood anything. Calder was already at the fireplace, and within seconds she heard the strike of flint, saw the flare of tinder catching. He worked with practiced efficiency, building up a fire that began to push back the cold. I'll be back in 20 minutes, he said, pulling his coat back on. The coat he'd given her, she realized with a start. He was going back out into the blizzard without it. Keep talking. Sing if you can. Stay awake. If you fall asleep now, you might not wake up. Then he was gone, the door slamming shut behind him, and Nora was alone in the cabin with the fire and her fading consciousness. She tried to do as he'd said, tried to stay awake. She counted the logs in the walls, counted her own breaths, tried to remember the words to hymns her mother had taught her, but the darkness kept creeping in at the edges. The fire crackled and popped, growing stronger. Heat began to penetrate the layers of ice and cold that had coated her skin. and with the heat came pain, excruciating, breath-stealing pain as blood flow returned to her extremities. Her fingers burned, her toes screamed. She bit down on her lip to keep from crying out. The door crashed open. Calder staggered in, carrying Agatha in his arms. The older woman hung limp and lifeless, and Nora's heart seized. Is she alive? Barely. Calder moved to the other side of the small cabin, laying Agatha down on what looked like a narrow cot. But her breathing's bad, real bad. He worked quickly, pulling off Agatha's wet outer layers, wrapping her in dry blankets. Then he was at the fire again, hanging a pot of water on the crane to heat, pulling out supplies from a trunk in the corner. You're a doctor? Nora managed. Ranch hand, but I've patched up enough men and animals to know the basics. He glanced at her, and even through her haze, she could see the worry in those ice-blue eyes. How are your hands and feet? Hurt? Good. Pain means they're still alive. He brought her a tin cup filled with something warm. Drink this. Slow sips. It's just heated water with a little whiskey. It'll help. Nora tried to hold the cup, but her hands were shaking too badly. Calder knelt beside the bed, steadying the cup and tipping it carefully to her lips. The liquid burned going down, harsh and medicinal, but it spread warmth through her chest. Thank you, she whispered. Don't thank me yet. His voice was grim. Your friend there. I don't know if she's going to make it through the night. She has to. She has a daughter, a grandson. Then we'll fight for her. Calder stood, moving back to Agatha. But right now, I need to focus on keeping her breathing and getting her body temperature up without shocking her system. Nora watched as he worked. He moved with the confidence of someone who'd done this before, checking Agatha's pulse, listening to her breathing, adjusting the blankets. He warmed cloths by the fire and laid them on Agatha's chest, replaced them when they cooled. He held more of the whiskey water to Agatha's lips, trying to coax even a few drops past her slack mouth. Come on, he muttered. Come on, lady. Don't quit on me. Outside, the blizzard raged on, but inside the cabin, warmth slowly built. The fire crackled cheerfully, indifferent to the drama unfolding in its light. Nora felt awareness returning in painful increments, her toes on fire, her fingers throbbing, her shoulder aching where she'd hit the ground. But she was alive. They were alive. Calder? Her voice was stronger now. How did you find us? He didn't look up from Agatha. Saw the stage leave Omaha yesterday. Knew Orrin was driving. Orrin, the driver. He said he was looking for someone named Calder. That got his attention. His head snapped up and the expression on his face was complicated. Anger, worry, something that might have been guilt. He was looking for me? Yes. He seemed panicked, afraid. He took the horses and left us. He what? The words came out flat, dangerous. After the crash, he came back, looked around, kept asking where you were. Then he took the horses and rode off. Calder was silent for a long moment. Then he swore, a long, creative string of profanity that would have shocked Nora back in Boston, but somehow seemed perfectly appropriate here. That goddamn fool, Calder said finally. He was supposed to wait. I told him to wait until the weather cleared. Your brothers? Unfortunately. The word was bitter. Half-brothers, technically. Same father, different mothers. I'm the bastard son from a Shoshone woman. Orrin's the legitimate heir from wife number 2. He left us to die. He panicked. Calder's jaw was tight. He's young, stupid, and when he gets scared, he doesn't think. He probably convinced himself he had to get those horses to safety, had to find me, had to... Hell, I don't know what goes through his head anymore. Will you go after him? In this storm? I'd be as dead as you'd be if I hadn't found you. Calder shook his head. Besides, my responsibility is here now, to you two. Orrin made his choice. Now I'm making mine. He went back to tending Agatha, and Nora watched in silence, gradually becoming more aware of her surroundings. The cabin was small, one room, maybe 20 feet square. The bed she lay on was against one wall, Agatha's cot against another. The fireplace dominated the third wall, with the door beside it. A small table, 2 chairs, a trunk, a few shelves. That was the extent of the furnishings. But it was warm, it was dry, it was shelter, it was life. Calder? she said again. Hmm? Thank you for coming back for her. For Agatha. Told you I would. He pressed 2 fingers to Agatha's neck, checking her pulse again. Though I'm not sure how much good it did. Her breathing's not improving. As if to punctuate his words, Agatha made a rattling sound deep in her chest. Her face was gray in the firelight, her lips tinged blue. What can we do? Nora tried to sit up, but dizziness swamped her. You can stay in that bed before you pass out and give me another patient to worry about. Calder's tone was sharp. And we can pray. Beyond that, we wait. See if she's strong enough to fight. She has to be. She has to. World doesn't run on has to, Miss Nora. Calder's voice was gentler now. But I've seen people survive things that should have killed them. So we'll hope. And we'll do what we can. He pulled a chair close to Agatha's cot and settled in, his face set in lines of grim determination. And Nora, despite her best efforts to stay awake, despite her worry for Agatha, felt consciousness slipping away. Sleep if you need to, Calder said, not looking at her. You're warm enough now. It's safe. But Agatha, I'll watch her. That's a promise. And somehow, despite everything, Nora believed him. This stranger who'd appeared out of the storm, this cowboy with sad eyes and gentle hands who'd risked his life twice already for 2 women he didn't know. She let her eyes close. The last thing she heard before sleep claimed her was Calder's low voice speaking to Agatha. You hang on, you hear me? I didn't drag you half a mile through a blizzard just to have you quit now. Your daughter's waiting. Your grandson's waiting. So you fight, lady. You fight like hell. And in the darkness behind her eyelids, Nora found herself praying that Agatha had the strength to do exactly that. Nora woke to the sound of someone chopping wood. For a disoriented moment, she thought she was back in Boston, listening to the groundskeeper splitting logs for the winter fires. Then awareness crashed back, the storm, the crash, the cowboy who'd saved them. She opened her eyes to find weak gray light filtering through a small window, illuminating a cabin that looked even more rustic in daylight than it had by firelight. The bed across from her was empty. Nora's heart lurched. She sat up too quickly and the room spun. Her hands flew to the mattress edge, gripping hard until the dizziness passed. Agatha? The door opened, bringing with it a blast of cold air, and Calder Boone, his arms loaded with firewood. Snow dusted his shoulders and hat. He kicked the door shut behind him and moved to the fireplace, adding logs to the embers. She's alive, he said without turning around. Woke up about an hour ago, confused, weak, but breathing better. Where is she? Back sleeping. I moved her to the bed you're in now. Figured you could share, keep each other warm. You were out cold, didn't even stir when I shifted you over. Nora looked down and realized she was indeed sharing the bed. Agatha curled beneath the blankets beside her, her breathing steady, if shallow. Relief flooded through her so powerfully that tears pricked her eyes. Hey now. Calder straightened from the fire, wiping his hands on his pants. None of that. She made it through the worst of it. I thought, when I woke and didn't see her, I know what you thought, but she's tougher than she looks. He moved to the small table where a pot sat steaming. Can you eat something? I've got stew. It's mostly rabbit and potatoes. Nothing fancy, but it's hot. Nora's stomach growled in answer, and Calder's mouth quirked in what might have been a smile. He ladled stew into a tin bowl and brought it to her, along with a spoon that had been worn smooth by years of use. Thank you. She took the bowl, surprised to find her hands mostly steady. The stew smelled like heaven, rich and savory, with bits of meat and vegetable floating in thick gravy. Don't thank me yet. You haven't tasted it. But there was no real humor in his voice. He looked exhausted, dark circles under those pale eyes, his jaw shadowed with 2 days' worth of beard. Did you sleep at all? Some. He poured himself coffee from another pot, thick, black, and probably strong enough to strip paint. Enough. Liar. That got a reaction, a quick glance, one eyebrow raised. Pardon? You stayed up all night watching us, making sure we didn't... She couldn't finish the sentence. Making sure you kept breathing, yeah. He took a long drink of coffee, grimaced. That's what you do when people are fighting hypothermia. You watch them. You keep the fire going. You pray a little if you're the praying type. Are you? The praying type? Used to be. My mother was. Something flickered across his face. Old pain, carefully buried. She died when I was 12. Haven't been much for prayer since. Nora ate her stew in silence, absorbing this information. Beside her, Agatha stirred, murmuring something incomprehensible before settling back into sleep. Outside, the wind had died down, but she could still hear the whisper of falling snow. Is the storm over? The worst of it. But there's more coming. Calder moved to the window, peering out at the white landscape. This is just a break. We'll get hit again tonight, maybe harder. And even if the weather clears completely, there's 4 feet of snow out there. Nobody's going anywhere for at least a week. A week? Trapped in this tiny cabin with a stranger and a woman who'd nearly died. Nora tried to process the implications. But surely people will be looking for us. When the stage doesn't arrive, they'll assume Oren holed up somewhere to wait out the storm, which is what he should have done in the first place. Calder's voice went hard. By the time they realize something's wrong, by the time they organize a search party, it'll be too late to do anything but recover bodies. That's cheerful? That's realistic. He turned from the window, his expression bleak. I'm sorry, Miss Nora. I know this isn't what you signed up for when you bought that stage ticket, but we're stuck here until the thaw, and that's just how it is. Nora set down her empty bowl, her mind racing through the logistics. A week in close quarters with this man. No privacy, no propriety. If word got out, and word always got out, her reputation would be destroyed. Not that she'd had much use for reputation lately, not since she'd broken her engagement and scandalized Boston society. But still. What about supplies? She asked, forcing herself to focus on practical matters. Do you have enough food for 3 people? I've got enough. Won't be fancy eating, but we won't starve. He collected her bowl, rinsed it in a basin of water. I stock up heavy before winter. Learned that lesson the hard way my first year out here. And clothing, Agatha and I are still wearing... She looked down at herself, realized she was wearing a man's shirt, several sizes too large, over her chemise. Her dress was nowhere to be seen. Heat flooded her cheeks. Oh. Your clothes were soaked through. Had to get them off you before you developed frostbite in places you really don't want frostbite. Calder's ears had gone slightly red, but his voice remained matter-of-fact. They're drying by the fire. Should be wearable by tomorrow, though they took some damage in the crash. I've got spare shirts and pants if you need them. I can't wear pants. You can if you want to keep your legs warm. He shrugged. But suit yourself. I'm not going to police your clothing choices, Miss Nora. She didn't know what to say to that. In her world, the world she'd left behind, the very suggestion of a woman wearing trousers would have caused fainting spells and clutched pearls. But this wasn't her world anymore. This was Nebraska territory, where apparently the rules were different. How bad is it? She asked. The frostbite? Could have been worse. Your fingers and toes are going to hurt like hell for a few days, might lose a nail or two, but you'll keep them. He paused. Mrs. Rowe, though, she's got some damage to her left foot. Won't know how bad until the swelling goes down, but she might lose a few toes. Nora looked at Agatha's sleeping form, her heart aching. Does she know? Not yet. Figured we'd cross that bridge when she's strong enough to handle it. Calder picked up his coffee cup, drained it. Right now, I'm just grateful she's alive. The rest we can deal with. You're very calm about all this. One of us has to be. He refilled his cup, offered her some. When she shook her head, he added, I've seen worse. Lost a fellow ranch hand 2 winters ago to exposure. Found him 3 days after he went missing, frozen solid not half a mile from the bunkhouse. Got turned around in a whiteout, walked in circles until he couldn't walk anymore. That's horrible. That's winter in Nebraska. He sat down at the table, and Nora noticed for the first time how his hands trembled slightly around the cup. Exhaustion, she realized. He was running on nothing but coffee and willpower. You learn to respect it, you learn to prepare, and you learn to accept that sometimes, despite everything you do, people still die. But we didn't. No. His eyes met hers, and something passed between them. Acknowledgement, perhaps, of the narrowness of their survival. You didn't, Though it was close, another hour and I would have been too late. How did you know to look for us? Calder was quiet for a moment, staring into his coffee. Like I said, I saw the stage leave Omaha, knew Orrin was driving, and I knew... He broke off, his jaw tightening. I knew he'd try to outrun the storm. He's always been like that, reckless. Thinks he's invincible. You tried to stop him? Tried. He wouldn't listen. We had words about it. The bitterness in his voice was palpable. So when the storm hit full force, I got worried. Went out looking, followed the stage route. Found the overturned coach about a mile from here. In that blizzard? How did you even see it? Almost didn't. My horse spooked. Smelled your perfume on the wind, probably, or maybe just sensed something was wrong. Either way, he led me to you. Calder stood abruptly, moving back to the fire. Lucky. That's all it was. Dumb luck. But Nora wasn't so sure. She watched him tend the fire, his movements economical and practiced, and thought about the choices he'd made. To go out in the storm, to search for a brother who'd ignored his warnings, to risk his life for strangers. Your brother, she said carefully. Orrin, do you think he's alive? Probably. He knows this territory, knows where to find shelter. He's stupid, but he's not incompetent. Calder poked at the fire with more force than necessary. Whether he'll come back here, though, that's another question. Why wouldn't he? Because he knows I'm going to be angry. No, not angry. Furious. He turned to face her, and she saw the tightly controlled rage beneath his calm exterior. He left you to die, Miss Nora. Left you and Mrs. Rowe in the snow without shelter, without supplies, without anything. And I'll bet my last dollar he told himself it was justified, that he had good reasons, that he was doing what he had to do. He seemed scared. Of course he was scared. We all get scared. But you don't abandon people because you're scared. You don't... He stopped himself, took a breath. I'm sorry. This isn't your burden to carry. But it was, Nora thought. Because Orrin's abandonment had nearly killed them, and only Calder's intervention had saved them. They were alive because one brother had failed them, and another had refused to let them die. Agatha stirred again, this time with purpose. Her eyes fluttered open, unfocused and confused. Where? You're safe. Nora leaned over her, touching her shoulder. We're in Mr. Boone's cabin. Do you remember? The storm. We crashed. Agatha's voice was rough, barely above a whisper. I remember flying through the air. Then nothing. You hit your head. You've been unconscious for over a day. Nora helped her sit up slightly, propping pillows behind her. But you're going to be all right. Calder appeared with another bowl of stew and a cup of weak tea. Mrs. Rowe, good to see you awake. Think you can eat something? Agatha looked at him with wide eyes, taking in his rough clothing, his weathered face, the cabin around them. You're the one who saved us. Calder Boone, ma'am, and I just happened to be in the right place at the right time. Sarah. Agatha gripped Nora's hand with surprising strength. My daughter. I have to get to Sarah. You will, Nora assured her, as soon as the weather clears and you're strong enough to travel. How long? Calder and Nora exchanged glances. Hard to say, Calder said finally. Could be a week. Could be longer. These storms can settle in for a while. Tears welled in Agatha's eyes. But Sarah is expecting me. She'll worry. Can't be helped. Calder's tone was gentle but firm. Right now, you need to focus on getting better. The rest will sort itself out. He helped Agatha eat, patient and careful, while Nora watched. She was learning things about this man with every passing hour, his competence, his kindness, the deep well of responsibility he carried. He'd taken them in without question, tended them without complaint, and now he was offering comfort to a woman he didn't know, promising her things would work out when he had no way of knowing if they would. After Agatha had eaten, she drifted back to sleep, exhausted by even that small effort. Calder cleaned up the dishes while Nora sat on the edge of the bed, testing her fingers and toes. Everything hurt. A deep, burning ache that made her wince with every movement. But Calder had been right. The pain meant they were healing. You should rest too, Calder said. You're not as recovered as you think. I've been unconscious for hours. I'm rested. Your body's been through trauma. Rest isn't optional, it's necessary. He pulled on his coat. I need to check on my horse, make sure he's got enough feed and water. You stay inside, stay warm. There's a chamber pot under the bed if you need it, and he hesitated, clearly uncomfortable. And if you need help with anything, just call. I'll hear you. Then he was gone, leaving Nora alone with her thoughts and the sleeping Agatha. She stood carefully, testing her legs, and made her way to the window. Outside, the world was white and still, the snow deep enough to reach halfway up the cabin walls. In the distance, she could see what looked like a small barn or stable, and Calder's dark figure trudging through the snow toward it. A week, she thought, or longer, trapped here with this stranger. Except he didn't feel like a stranger anymore. The days began to blur together in a rhythm of survival and small intimacies. Calder chopped wood, tended the fire, cooked meals of rabbit stew and cornbread and beans. Nora helped where she could, mending the tears in her and Agatha's clothing, tidying the cabin, changing the dressings on Agatha's frostbitten foot. They didn't talk much at first, circling each other like wary animals, maintaining a careful politeness. But proximity has a way of wearing down walls. It started small. On the third day, Nora was trying to hang wet laundry near the fire when her damaged fingers refused to cooperate. She fumbled the shirt twice, swearing under her breath, before Calder appeared at her elbow. Here. He took the shirt from her, his hands brushing hers. Let me. I can do it. Didn't say you couldn't, but you're making it harder than it needs to be. He hung the shirt with practiced ease, then reached for the next item. Sometimes accepting help isn't weakness, Miss Nora. It's just common sense. She wanted to argue, but the words died in her throat. Because he was right, and because his hands were gentle as he helped her, and because there was something in his eyes that made her chest feel tight. Thank you, she said quietly. Welcome. He finished hanging the laundry, then moved back to the table where he'd been repairing a bridle. You know, you keep calling me Mr. Boone. Makes me feel like my father. Just Calder is fine. Then you should call me Nora. Not Miss Nora, just Nora. Nora. He tested the name, his voice making it sound different somehow. Softer. All right then, Nora. You want to tell me why a woman from Boston is heading to California alone? She should have expected the question, should have prepared an answer, but she found herself telling him the truth instead. About Charles Ashford and his respectable banker life. About the engagement that had felt like a noose. About her decision to break it off, and the scandal that had followed. My mother didn't speak to me for a month, Nora said, staring into the fire. Said I was throwing my life away. That no decent man would want me now. And what did you say? That maybe I didn't want a decent man. Maybe I wanted to live my own life on my own terms. She laughed, but there was no humor in it. She told me I'd regret it, that I'd end up alone and poor, teaching other people's children in some godforsaken frontier town. Would that be so bad? Nora looked at him, surprised. You don't think it's foolish? A woman turning down security for, what, independence? I think a cage is still a cage, even if it's made of gold. Calder's hand stilled on the bridle. My mother, she was Shoshone like I said, fell in love with my father when he was trapping in her people's territory. He promised her everything, a home, a family, respect. What he gave her was a shack on the edge of his property and a son he wouldn't acknowledge in public. That's terrible. That's what happens when you trust the wrong person's promises. His voice was flat. She died of pneumonia when I was 12. My father let me stay on the ranch as a hand, but that's all I'd ever be. Orrin's mother made sure of that. So when I was 18, I left. Found work where I could, saved my money, learned everything I could about surviving out here. And this cabin? Built it myself. It's not much, but it's mine. No one can take it from me, and I don't owe anyone anything. He resumed working on the bridle. So no, Nora, I don't think you're foolish for choosing independence over security. I think you're brave. The word hung in the air between them, fragile and powerful. Nora felt something shift in her chest. A recognition, perhaps, of kinship. They were both running from cages, both trying to build lives on their own terms. Thank you, she said finally, for understanding. Nothing to thank me for. It's just the truth. On the fourth day, the second storm hit. It came suddenly, the wind rising from whisper to shriek in minutes. Snow battered the cabin walls, and the temperature dropped so fast they could see their breath despite the roaring fire. "Everyone away from the windows," Calder ordered, his voice sharp with urgency. He was stuffing rags into gaps in the walls, anywhere the wind might get through. "Agatha, you stay in that bed and don't move. Nora, help me with these blankets." They worked together, hanging blankets over the window and door to add extra insulation. The cabin grew darker, lit only by the fire, but warmer. Calder added log after log to the flames, building up a heat reserve against the brutal cold outside. "How long will this last?" Agatha asked, her voice thin with worry. "Could be hours, could be days." Calder checked their wood supply, his face grim. "We've got enough to make it through, but it's going to be tight quarters for a while." Tight quarters was an understatement. The three of them huddled close to the fire, wrapped in blankets, listening to the storm rage. Calder told stories to pass the time, tales of cattle drives and wild horses, of summers spent in the high country and winters that tested men's souls. Nora found herself drawn in by his voice, by the cadence of his words, by the glimpses he gave into a life so different from her own. When darkness fell, not that they could tell much difference in the blanket-shrouded cabin, Agatha asked Nora to sing. "I'm not much of a singer," Nora protested. "Please, it would help." Agatha's face was drawn with pain. Her foot was worse today, swollen and angry-looking despite Calder's careful tending. So Nora sang. Hymns at first, the ones her mother had taught her. Then folk songs, work songs, even a few bawdy tavern ballads she'd overheard in the Omaha saloon, which made Calder laugh, a real laugh. Surprised and genuine. "Didn't figure you for knowing songs like that," he said, grinning. "I have hidden depths." She smiled back, and for a moment the storm outside didn't matter. That night, they slept in shifts. Calder insisted he take the first watch, keeping the fire fed, making sure the cold didn't seep in. Nora woke sometime in the deep hours to find him nodding off in his chair, and she rose quietly, wrapping a blanket around her shoulders. "You need to rest," she whispered, touching his shoulder. He jerked awake, his hand going instinctively to the knife at his belt before he recognized her. "Sorry, old habits." "Sleep, I'll watch the fire." "Nora, please. You've been taking care of us for days. Let me help." She settled into the chair as he stood reluctantly. "I promise I'll wake you if anything changes." He looked at her for a long moment, something unreadable in his eyes. Then he nodded and moved to the empty cot, lying down fully dressed. Within minutes, his breathing had deepened into sleep. Nora tended the fire, watching the flames dance and listening to the wind howl. In the bed against the wall, Agatha slept fitfully, murmuring in her dreams. And on the cot, Calder was finally at rest, his face younger in sleep, the hard lines smoothed away. She thought about what he'd told her, about his mother, about being the unacknowledged son, about building this life with his own hands. She thought about his brother, who'd abandoned them out of fear or selfishness, or whatever drove a man to such choices. And she thought about Calder himself, who'd ridden into a blizzard to save strangers, who'd given them his bed and his food and his kindness without expecting anything in return. What kind of man did that? The storm broke just before dawn, the wind dying as suddenly as it had risen. Calder woke immediately, years of frontier living making him alert despite barely 4 hours of sleep. He checked the cabin, checked Agatha, then stepped outside to assess the damage. Nora followed him out, gasping as the cold hit her lungs. The world was buried under fresh snow, at least 6 feet now, with drifts twice that high. Calder's barn was nearly invisible, just the peak of its roof showing above the white. "Gonna take days to dig out," Calder said grimly. He looked at the sky, calculating. "But at least the worst is past. If the weather holds, we might be able to get you to town in a week or so." Town. Civilization. Nora should have felt relieved. Instead, she felt something uncomfortably close to disappointment. They worked together that day, digging paths through the snow. Calder did most of the heavy lifting, but Nora insisted on helping, ignoring his protests about her injured hands. They cleared a path to the barn, where his horse nickered gratefully at the sight of them. They dug out the door, piled snow away from the cabin walls, gathered more wood. It was exhausting, physical work, and Nora had never felt more alive. Her muscles ached, her hands throbbed, sweat froze on her face. But she was doing something real, something that mattered. And when Calder grinned at her over a pile of snow, his eyes crinkling at the corners, she felt her heart do something complicated in her chest. That evening, Agatha was well enough to sit at the table for dinner. Her color was better, though she moved stiffly, favoring her injured foot. Calder had made a feast by cabin standards, venison he'd had hanging in the barn, along with biscuits and gravy and the last of his coffee. "This is wonderful," Agatha said, eating with more appetite than she'd shown in days. "You're a good cook, Mr. Boone." "Necessity. Can't afford to be a bad cook when you're feeding yourself." He passed Nora the biscuits, their fingers brushing. "Though I'll admit my biscuits aren't a patch on what my mother used to make." "Tell us about her," Nora said impulsively. "Your mother. What was she like?" Calder was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then he began to speak, slowly at first, then with more confidence. He told them about a woman who could track deer through forest and snow, who knew every plant and herb and their uses, who sang songs in a language he'd mostly forgotten. A woman who'd loved fiercely and been betrayed by that love, but who'd never let bitterness poison her son. "She told me once," Calder said, staring into his coffee, "that love wasn't about deserving, that you couldn't earn it or buy it, couldn't demand it or force it. She said love was like a gift. You either received it with grace or you destroyed it with expectations." "She sounds wise," Agatha said softly. She was. "Still wish I'd had more time to learn from her." He looked up, met Nora's eyes. "But I remember the important parts. Be honest. Be kind. Don't make promises you can't keep. And when you find something worth holding on to, you hold on with everything you've got." The words seemed to echo in the small cabin, and Nora felt her breath catch, because he was still looking at her, and there was something in his gaze that made her feel exposed and seen and utterly vulnerable. Agatha cleared her throat delicately. "Well, I think I'm ready to return to bed." "It's been a long day." Calder stood immediately to help her, and the moment broke. But Nora could still feel it, the weight of his words, the intensity of his gaze. Something was building between them, something that should have been impossible given the circumstances. You couldn't fall for someone in 5 days. You couldn't develop feelings for a stranger who'd saved your life. Could you? That night, lying in the darkness beside Agatha, Nora stared at the ceiling and listened to Calder's steady breathing from the cot across the room. She thought about Boston and Charles Ashford, about the life she'd rejected. She thought about California and the teaching position, about the future she'd planned. And she thought about a cabin in Nebraska, and a man with sad blue eyes, and the possibility that sometimes the life you were running toward wasn't the one you actually needed. The 6th day dawned clear and brutally cold. Calder announced they'd start preparing for the journey to town, the nearest settlement, a place called Clearwater, about 8 miles west. He'd fashioned a sled to pull Agatha since she couldn't ride, and they'd travel slowly, stopping frequently. "How long will it take?" Nora asked, helping him sort through supplies. 2 days, probably. Maybe 3 if the weather turns. He pulled out an old buffalo hide, checking it for damage. "We'll need to wait a bit longer, though. Make sure you're both strong enough for the trip." "What about you? Will you come back here after?" "Eventually. This is home." He ran his hand over the buffalo hide, his expression distant. "But I need to find Orrin first. Make sure he's alive. And if he is..." His jaw tightened. "We're going to have words about what he did." "You're angry at him." "I'm furious at him, but he's still my brother." Calder looked at her. "Family's complicated. You don't get to choose your blood, only what you do about it." That afternoon, Agatha called Nora over to the bed, her voice low and urgent. "That man," she said without preamble. "Mr. Boone, he cares for you." "What? No, he's just..." "I may be old, child, but I'm not blind. The way he looks at you, the way you look at him when you think no one's watching." Agatha gripped Nora's hand. "There's something growing between you two." "That's ridiculous. I barely know him." "Sometimes a few days of truth tell you more about a person than years of polite conversation." Agatha's eyes were serious. "He's a good man, Nora. A truly good man. Those are rare. I have a job waiting for me in California. And he has a life here." "I know." Agatha sighed. I'm not telling you what to do. I'm just saying, pay attention to what your heart is telling you, not your head, not your plans, your heart. Nora wanted to argue, to protest that her heart wasn't telling her anything, but that would have been a lie, and Agatha would have known it, because her heart was speaking loud and clear, and what it was saying terrified her. That night, Calder taught her how to play poker. They used dried beans as chips, sitting at the small table while Agatha watched from the bed, laughing at their antics. Nora turned out to be surprisingly good at bluffing, winning 3 hands in a row until Calder accused her of cheating. "I'm not cheating. You're just easy to read." "Easy to read?" He narrowed his eyes. "All right then. What am I thinking right now?" Nora studied his face, the slight quirk of his mouth, the way his eyes crinkled at the corners, the relaxed set of his shoulders. "You're thinking you're going to win this next hand." "Wrong." His voice had gone soft, serious. "I'm thinking how glad I am that I went out in that storm, that I found you in time." The beans scattered, forgotten on the table. Agatha had conveniently fallen asleep, or was pretending to, and Nora was caught in Calder's gaze, unable to look away. "Calder, I know. You're heading to California. You have plans, a life waiting for you." He reached across the table, his rough fingers gentle as they covered hers. "But I need you to know, these days with you have been the best I've had in longer than I can remember. And when you leave, I'm going to miss you. Miss this." "I'll miss you too," she whispered. The admission felt like stepping off a cliff. "Then maybe—" He stopped, shook his head. "Never mind. It's not fair to ask." "Ask what?" "Stay." The word was barely audible. "Stay here. With me. I know it's crazy. I know we barely know each other, but I feel like—" He struggled for words. "Like I've been waiting my whole life and didn't even know it until you showed up, half frozen, in that storm." Nora's heart was hammering so hard she could hear it in her ears. "I can't. The teaching position— Screw the teaching position. Marry me instead." The words tumbled out in a rush, and Calder looked as surprised as she felt that he'd said them. "I'm serious. We could get married in Clearwater before we head west. That way, if you still want to go to California, I'll go with you. If you want to stay here, we build a life together. Either way, we're together." "You're proposing? After 6 days?" "I know it's insane, but nothing about this situation is normal, Nora. We survived something that should have killed us. We've lived in closer quarters than most married couples, and we haven't driven each other crazy. You're strong and smart and brave, and you don't back down from hard work. And when you smile—" He broke off, shaking his head. "When you smile, everything feels possible." Nora's mind was reeling. Marriage. To a cowboy she'd known less than a week. Every rational part of her brain was screaming that this was madness, that she should say no, that she should stick to her plans. But her heart, her traitorous, foolish heart, was whispering something entirely different. "I need to think," she managed. It's too fast, too much." "I understand." Calder withdrew his hand and she immediately missed its warmth. "Take all the time you need. But Nora, I meant every word." That night, Nora lay awake for hours, her mind churning. Across the room, Calder slept fitfully, and beside her, Agatha's breathing was steady and even. She thought about the proposal, about the life Calder was offering, a cabin in the wilderness, hard work and harder winters, but also honesty and kindness, and a man who looked at her like she was worth fighting for. Versus California, independence, a career. Everything she'd fought for when she left Boston. How could she possibly choose? The answer came to Nora not in words, but in a feeling, a certainty that settled into her bones sometime in the dark hours before dawn. She lay there listening to the wind whisper against the cabin walls, to Agatha's soft breathing, to the crackle of dying embers in the fireplace. And she realized that the question wasn't whether she could choose Calder over California. The question was whether she was brave enough to choose what her heart wanted over what her head had planned. When morning light filtered through the window, she found Calder already awake, sitting at the table with his coffee, staring into the cup like it held answers. He looked up when she stirred, and the vulnerability in his eyes nearly broke her. "I need to tell you something," she said softly, careful not to wake Agatha. She wrapped a blanket around her shoulders and moved to sit across from him. About why I really left Boston. Calder waited, saying nothing, giving her space to find the words. I told you about Charles, about breaking the engagement, but what I didn't tell you was that he didn't accept it. He came to my house the night before I left, drunk and angry, said I belonged to him, that I'd made promises. Her hands were shaking, so she wrapped them around the warm cup Calder had poured for her. He tried to, he wanted to. Did he hurt you? Calder's voice was deadly quiet. My father stopped him, threw him out. But Charles told everyone, all of Boston society, that I was the one who'd been unfaithful, that I'd broken his heart for another man. By morning, I was ruined. No one would believe my side of it, so I ran. She met Calder's eyes. I ran because I was afraid of what he might do if I stayed, afraid of being trapped in a city where everyone believed his lies, afraid of never being free. And now? Calder asked gently. Are you still afraid? Terrified. She laughed, but it came out shaky. Because this feels like the opposite of running. This feels like choosing something, and I don't know if I'm brave enough for that. Nora. He reached across the table, his calloused hand covering hers. What happened to you in Boston? That wasn't love. That was possession, control. A man who loved you wouldn't have tried to force you, wouldn't have lied about you when you chose yourself over him. I know that. In my head, I know that. But my heart, your heart is smart enough to know the difference. His thumb traced circles on her wrist. I'm not asking you to belong to me. I'm asking if you want to build something together. Two people, equal partners, making a life. If you decide California is where you need to be, I'll support that. If you decide you want to stay here, we'll make it work. And if you decide you need more time to figure it out, I'll wait. How can you be so patient, so understanding? Because I've spent my whole life being told I wasn't enough. The bastard son, the half-breed. Not white enough for white society, not Shoshone enough for my mother's people, always on the outside looking in. His eyes were intense, burning. So when I meet someone who sees me, really sees me, I don't take that for granted, and I don't try to cage it. Nora felt tears spilling down her cheeks. I do see you, God help me, Calder. I see you and it terrifies me because I've known you less than a week and I feel more for you than I ever felt for Charles in 2 years. Then what are you afraid of? That it's too fast, that I'm making a mistake, that 6 months from now I'll wake up and realize this was just survival instinct or gratitude, or maybe, Calder interrupted quietly, 6 months from now you'll wake up and realize it was real, that what we found in this storm was exactly what we both needed, even if neither of us was looking for it. Before Nora could respond, Agatha's voice cut through the tension. For heaven's sake, child, just say yes. They both turned to find the older woman propped up on one elbow, watching them with exasperated affection. How long have you been awake? Nora asked, her cheeks burning. Long enough to hear two people dance around what's perfectly obvious. Agatha struggled to sit up, and Calder moved immediately to help her, adjusting pillows behind her back. Thank you, dear. Now, Nora, I'm going to tell you something, and I want you to listen. When I was your age, I had 2 suitors. One was safe, a shopkeeper, steady income, respected family. The other was wild, a sailor who wanted to see the world. I chose the shopkeeper because it was sensible. But you said your husband was a good man, and I loved him in my way. But I never forgot that sailor, Nora. Never forgot the way he made me feel alive, like anything was possible. He sailed off without me, and I spent 30 years wondering what might have been if I'd been brave enough to choose passion over sense. Agatha's eyes were bright with unshed tears. When my husband died last year, you know what I found among his things? Letters? From that sailor. He'd written to me for 5 years, begging me to change my mind, to meet him in a dozen different ports. My husband had intercepted them all, hidden them. Thought he was protecting me. Oh, Agatha. So you see, child, safety is an illusion. Caution is just fear wearing a respectable dress. And if this man is offering you something real, something that makes your heart race and your soul sing, then for God's sake, be brave enough to take it. The cabin fell silent except for the crackle of the fire. Nora looked at Calder, at this rough-handed cowboy with sad eyes and a gentle heart, who'd ridden into a blizzard to save strangers, who'd given them his bed and his food and his kindness, who was offering her not a cage but a partnership, not possession but choice. "Ask me again," she whispered. Calder's eyes widened. "Nora Utz, ask me again, properly, this time." He stood slowly, moved around the table, and dropped to one knee beside her chair. His hands were shaking as he took hers, and Nora realized that he was just as terrified as she was, just as uncertain, just as brave. "Nora Whitfield," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "I know this is crazy. I know it's too fast, too soon, too everything. But I also know that I'd rather spend 1 year with you than a lifetime without you. So I'm asking, will you marry me? Will you let me spend the rest of my life trying to deserve you?" "Yes." The word came out clear and strong, no hesitation. "Yes, Calder, I'll marry you." He surged up, pulling her into his arms, and Nora felt something inside her chest crack wide open. This was nothing like the tepid affection she'd felt for Charles, nothing like the dutiful kisses they'd shared. This was fire and ice, terror and joy, a feeling so big it couldn't be contained. "Thank the Lord," Agatha said, wiping her eyes. "I thought you two would dance around it until spring." Calder laughed against Nora's hair, and she felt the vibration of it through her whole body. "We should leave for Clearwater tomorrow," he said, pulling back just enough to see her face. "Get you both to safety, find a preacher. That is, do you want to wait? Have a proper wedding?" "I want to marry you." Nora touched his face, traced the line of his jaw. "I don't need proper. I just need you." "Then tomorrow it is." He kissed her forehead, her cheeks, the tip of her nose, and finally, softly, reverently, her lips. It was chaste as kisses went, appropriate with Agatha watching, but Nora felt it all the way to her toes. The rest of the day was a flurry of preparation. Calder spent hours constructing a sled from old wood and rope, testing it repeatedly to make sure it would bear Agatha's weight. Nora mended their clothing as best she could, using thread from Calder's sparse supplies. The tears from the crash were beyond her skill to fix properly, but she made them serviceable at least. "You'll need warmer clothes," Calder said, eyeing her thin dress. "I've got extra wool shirts, and I can spare a pair of my old pants. They'll be too big, but we can tie them with rope. I'm going to show up in a frontier town wearing men's trousers." Nora laughed at the absurdity of it. "My mother would die of shame." "Your mother isn't here, and trust me, folks in Clearwater have seen stranger sights." He pulled out the promised clothing, then hesitated. "There's something else. Something I need to tell you before we get there." The seriousness in his tone made Nora's stomach tighten. "What is it?" "Clearwater is, well, it's not exactly welcoming to people like me. My mother's people, I mean. There's been trouble between the town and the Shoshone, bad blood going back years. And he looked down at his hands. I look like my mother. Can't hide it. So there might be talk. Might be people who object to us marrying." "Let them object." Nora's voice was fierce. "I don't care what they think. You say that now, but when we're standing in front of everyone, when you hear what they might say about me, about us, Calder Boone, look at me." She waited until his eyes met hers. "I just agreed to marry a man I've known for a week. You think I'm going to let a bunch of small-minded bigots change my mind? I'm tougher than that." A slow smile spread across his face. "Yeah, you are." That night, their last in the cabin, felt weighted with significance. Calder gave Nora and Agatha the bed as always, taking the cot for himself. But Nora lay awake for hours, hyper-aware of his presence across the room, of the fact that tomorrow night, after they were married, everything would change. "Nervous?" Agatha whispered beside her. "Is it that obvious?" "Child, I can hear your heart beating from here." Agatha patted her hand in the darkness. "It's normal to be nervous. Marriage is a big step, even when you're sure." Do you think I'm making a mistake?" "No, I think you're making a choice, a brave one." Agatha was quiet for a moment. "But I'll tell you what my mother told me the night before my wedding. A good marriage isn't about finding someone perfect. It's about finding someone whose imperfections you can live with and who can live with yours. Someone who will fight with you and for you. Someone who will still be there when things get hard. And they will get hard, Nora. Life sees to that. Calder's already proved he'll be there. He came into a blizzard for us. He did, and tomorrow you'll be making the same promise to him, that you'll be there, in storm and sunshine, for better or worse. Agatha squeezed her hand. Just make sure you mean it, because that man over there, he's giving you his whole heart. Don't take it if you're not prepared to guard it. I am, Nora said it with certainty. I'm prepared. Morning came too quickly, and not quickly enough. Calder was up before dawn, checking supplies and preparing the sled. Nora helped Agatha dress in layers, both of them bundled against the brutal cold. When Nora finally emerged from behind the blanket they'd hung for privacy, wearing Calder's too large shirt and pants cinched with rope, he looked at her with such open admiration that she blushed. You wear them well, he said simply. I look ridiculous. You look like a woman who's going to survive the journey to Clearwater. He handed her his spare coat, heavy wool lined with fur. Which is what matters. They left the cabin just after sunrise, Calder leading his horse with the sled hitched behind. Agatha lay bundled on the sled, wrapped in every blanket Calder owned. Nora walked beside him, breaking trail through the snow, her legs burning with the effort but her heart strangely light. The journey was grueling. The snow was deep, the temperature far below freezing, and they had to stop frequently to rest and warm themselves. Calder had packed a small tent and supplies for camping, and by mid-afternoon it was clear they wouldn't reach Clearwater before nightfall. We'll make camp here, Calder announced, surveying a copse of trees that would provide some shelter from the wind. Get through the night, then push on to town in the morning. Setting up camp was harder than Nora had imagined. Her hands were clumsy with cold, and even simple tasks like gathering firewood left her breathless. But Calder was patient, showing her what to do, praising her efforts. By the time full dark fell, they had a fire burning and the tent erected, and Agatha was settled as comfortably as possible given the circumstances. How's your foot? Nora asked, checking the bandages. Hurts, Agatha admitted, but I'll manage. I've come too far to quit now. They ate a cold supper. There wasn't enough firewood to spare for cooking, and huddled close to the fire. The night was clear, stars blazing overhead in impossible numbers. Nora had never seen so many stars, never imagined the sky could hold such brightness. It's beautiful, she breathed. Wait until summer, Calder said, when you can actually stay outside long enough to appreciate it without losing fingers to frostbite. He was sitting close beside her, their shoulders touching. We'll bring blankets up to the high meadow, watch the stars all night. I'll show you the Milky Way, teach you the constellations my mother taught me. I'd like that. Nora leaned into him, savoring his warmth. Tell me about summer here. What's it like? So he told her about wildflowers carpeting the meadows, about the way the grass grew tall and green, about cattle grazing on the high pastures and the sound of wind through the pines. He painted a picture of a place transformed from the frozen wasteland around them, and Nora found herself hungry for it, eager to see this land in its glory. You really love it here, she said. It's the only place I've ever felt like I belonged. He stared into the fire. My mother used to say that the land doesn't care about your blood or your name. It only cares if you respect it, if you work with it instead of against it. That's what I try to do, be a good steward. Take what I need, but give back too. What do you give back? I plant trees every spring to replace the ones I cut for firewood. I rotate my hunting grounds so I don't deplete the game. I share meat with the Shoshone camps when I have extra. He shrugged. Small things. But my mother taught me that small things add up. That how you treat the land says everything about how you'll treat the people you love. Nora thought about that. About the careful way he'd tended to her and Agatha. About his patience and generosity. About how he'd built a life with his own hands and maintained it with respect and care. This was a man who understood responsibility, who honored his commitments. I think, she said slowly, that your mother would be proud of the man you've become. Calder's throat worked. I hope so. I try to... He stopped, collected himself. I try to live in a way that would honor her memory. Some days I do better than others. That's all anyone can do. They sat in comfortable silence after that, watching the fire burn down to embers. Agatha had fallen asleep in the tent, her soft snores audible over the crackle of dying flames. Finally, Calder banked the fire and they crawled into the tent themselves. The three of them squeezed together for warmth. "One more night," Calder whispered in the darkness, his breath warm against Nora's ear. "Then you'll be Mrs. Boone." Nora Boone. She tested the name. "It sounds strange. Good strange or bad strange?" "Good, definitely good." She found his hand in the darkness, laced her fingers through his. "I'm ready, Calder. Whatever comes tomorrow, I'm ready." "So am I," he said, and she heard the truth of it in his voice. "So am I." They reached Clearwater just after noon the next day. The town was small, a main street with perhaps 20 buildings, most of them rough-hewn log structures. But there was a general store, a saloon, a small church, and most importantly, a doctor's office with a hand-painted sign swinging in the wind. People stopped to stare as they passed. Nora was acutely aware of how they must look. Her in men's clothing, Calder with his obviously native features, Agatha bundled on a makeshift sled. She heard whispers, saw fingers pointing, felt the weight of judgment settling over them like a heavy cloak. "Ignore them," Calder muttered, his jaw tight. "We're here for Agatha and the preacher. That's all that matters." The doctor's office was warm and clean, and the doctor himself, a middle-aged man with kind eyes and careful hands, examined Agatha with professional efficiency. "Frostbite," he confirmed, after studying her foot. "Fairly severe. You're going to lose 3 toes, ma'am. I'm sorry, but the rest should heal fine if we can keep infection away." Agatha took the news with remarkable composure. "When?" "Tomorrow, if you're strong enough. Better to take them now while we can do it clean, rather than wait and risk gangrene." "Then tomorrow it is." Agatha looked at Nora. "You'll stay with me?" "Of course. But Agatha, Calder, and we were planning to find the preacher today." "Then go. Get married. I'll be fine here with Dr. Morrison." She smiled, though her face was drawn with pain and worry. "I want to hear all about it when you come back." The preacher's house was on the edge of town, a tidy structure with a small garden buried under snow. Reverend Hayes answered the door himself, a tall, spare man with white hair and penetrating eyes that seemed to look straight through to the soul. "Help you?" he asked, his gaze moving between Nora and Calder with obvious curiosity. "We'd like to be married," Calder said. "Today, if possible." "Today?" The Reverend's eyebrows rose. "That's rather sudden. Do you have family here? Anyone to stand up for you?" "No family, just us." Calder's hand found Nora's, squeezed gently. "We've got good reason for the rush, though. Been through some hard times together, and we don't want to wait any longer." Reverend Hayes studied them for a long moment. Nora felt her heart hammering, sure he was going to refuse, going to lecture them about propriety and proper engagements and all the things she'd fled Boston to escape. Instead, he smiled. "Well then, come in out of the cold. Let's talk about this properly." The interior of the house was cozy, filled with books and the smell of coffee. The Reverend's wife, a plump woman with a warm smile, brought them cups and settled in to listen as they told their story. They kept it simple: the storm, the crash, the week in Calder's cabin. They didn't mention Orrin or his abandonment, didn't talk about Nora's flight from Boston, just the facts needed to explain why 2 strangers wanted to marry on such short acquaintance. "And you're certain?" Reverend Hayes asked, looking at Nora. "You're not being coerced or forced in any way?" "I'm certain. More certain than I've ever been about anything." "And you, son, this isn't about, forgive me for asking, but it's not about compromised virtue or obligation?" "It's about love," Calder said simply. "I love her, sir. Want to spend my life proving it to her." The Reverend's wife made a small sound, part sigh, part pleased hum. "Oh, that's lovely. Martin, we have to marry them." "Now, Judith, don't now Judith me. Look at them. They're in love and they've survived something terrible together, and they want to start their life right. What's wrong with that?" Reverend Hayes looked at his wife, then back at Calder and Nora. "Nothing, I suppose. Though people in town might talk. Your heritage," he addressed this to Calder. "Some folks here won't like it." "Some folks have never liked me," Calder replied evenly. "I'm used to it." "But your bride shouldn't have to—" "I can handle it," Nora interrupted. "I'm not some delicate flower who needs protecting from gossip. I'm marrying Calder because I choose to. What anyone else thinks is their problem, not mine. Judith clapped her hands together. I like her. Martin, get your Bible. We're doing this. The Reverend sighed, but he was smiling. Very well, but I insist on a proper ceremony. None of this rushed, furtive business. If you're going to marry, we're doing it right. Judith, fetch that blue dress from the trunk. And see if you can find some flowers. Yes, I know it's winter, but you always manage. What followed was a whirlwind of activity. Judith whisked Nora away to a back room where she helped her out of Calder's oversized clothes and into a borrowed dress, simple blue wool, but clean and pretty and blessedly warm. She produced a hairbrush and set about taming Nora's wind-tangled hair, braiding it and pinning it up with remarkable skill. You're very kind, Nora said, watching the woman work in the mirror. Nonsense, I just remember what it's like to be young and in love. Judith's hands were gentle, efficient. Martin and I married young too. My parents objected, said he was too poor, too serious. But I knew. Sometimes you just know. Did you ever regret it? Marrying Martin? Never. Oh, we've had our hard times, years when money was tight, when faith was tested. But we've had 52 years together, child. 52 years of mornings waking up beside my best friend. That's worth any hardship. She tucked the last pin into place, stepped back to admire her work. There. You look beautiful. Nora barely recognized herself in the mirror. The woman staring back looked confident, radiant, ready. Her cheeks were flushed, her eyes bright. She looked like someone about to step into a new life. Which, she supposed, she was. Judith produced a small bouquet, dried flowers from summer, carefully preserved. Lavender and sage, she explained, for devotion and wisdom. Not much, but they're perfect. Nora took the bouquet, her hands shaking slightly. Thank you for all of this. Don't thank me yet. You still have to say your vows without fainting. But Judith was smiling. Come on, your young man is probably wearing a hole in Martin's floor by now. Calder was indeed pacing, but he stopped the moment Nora entered the room. The look on his face, wonder, awe, love, made her breath catch. He was wearing a clean shirt borrowed from the Reverend, his hair still damp from washing, his jaw freshly shaved. He looked devastatingly handsome and utterly terrified. You're beautiful, he said hoarsely. So are you. Reverend Hayes cleared his throat. Shall we begin? They stood before the simple wooden altar in the Reverend's parlor, Judith and the Reverend's grown daughter serving as witnesses. Outside, snow began to fall again, soft, gentle flakes that drifted past the windows like blessing. And Reverend Hayes opened his worn Bible and began to speak. Dearly beloved, we are gathered here today. The words washed over Nora like water, familiar and strange at once. She'd heard them before at society weddings in Boston, elaborate affairs with hundreds of guests and orchestras and champagne. This was nothing like that. This was raw and real and intimate, just two people making promises to each other before God and a handful of witnesses. Do you, Calder Boone, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better, for worse, for richer, for poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish, till death do you part? I do. Calder's voice rang out clear and certain, and his hands were steady as they held hers. And do you, Nora Whitfield, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better, for worse, for richer, for poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish, till death do you part? This was it, the moment of choice, the point of no return. Nora thought of Boston and Charles and the life she'd rejected. She thought of California and independence and the teaching position waiting for her. She thought of all the roads not taken, all the lives she might have lived. Then she looked at Calder, at this good, brave, beautiful man who'd saved her life and offered her his heart, and knew with absolute certainty that she was exactly where she was meant to be. I do, she said, and her voice didn't waver. Reverend Hayes smiled. By the power vested in me by the territory of Nebraska, I now pronounce you husband and wife. You may kiss your bride. Calder cupped her face in his hands, his touch infinitely gentle, and kissed her like she was something precious and fragile and miraculous all at once. It wasn't passionate, not with the Reverend and his wife watching, but it was full of promise, full of future. When they finally broke apart, Judith was crying happy tears and the Reverend was beaming. "Congratulations, Mr. and Mrs. Boone," he said warmly. "May God bless your union." Mrs. Boone. Nora turned the name over in her mind, testing its weight, its shape. She was married to a cowboy, after knowing him barely a week. It should have felt insane, reckless, wrong. Instead, it felt like coming home. They emerged from Reverend Hayes's house as husband and wife into a world transformed by fresh snow. Word had apparently spread through Clearwater's small population with remarkable speed because a small crowd had gathered in the street. Ranch hands and shopkeepers, women with shawls wrapped tight against the cold, children peering around their mother's skirts with wide eyes. Nora felt Calder's hand tighten on hers as they stepped into the street. The crowd parted, some faces curious, others openly hostile. She heard the whispers, harsh, ugly words about half-breeds and white women who didn't know their place. Her spine stiffened, but before she could respond, Judith Hayes pushed past them onto the porch. "Congratulations are in order," the Reverend's wife announced loudly, her voice carrying across the gathered crowd. "Mr. and Mrs. Calder Boone were just married in our parlor. A lovely ceremony. They make a beautiful couple, don't they?" The crowd muttered, uncertain. Then a woman stepped forward, older, weathered, wearing a flour-dusted apron. "I'm May Johnson, run the general store." She looked Calder up and down, then nodded once. "Your mother was a good woman. Helped my husband when he got snake-bit back in '68. Probably saved his life." She turned to Nora. "You could do worse than marry her son, Mrs. Boone." "Thank you," Nora managed, surprised by the unexpected support. "Don't thank me yet. Half this town's going to give you grief for it." May's expression was pragmatic rather than unkind. "But the other half will remember that blood don't make a man. His actions do. And from what I hear, Calder here pulled 2 women out of a blizzard that should have killed them. That counts for something." A few voices murmured agreement. Others remained stubbornly silent, disapproving. But the hostility had shifted, diffused slightly by May's intervention. Reverend Hayes stepped forward, placing a hand on Calder's shoulder. "This young man and his bride have been through an ordeal. They need supplies for their journey west, and I trust this community will show them proper Christian hospitality." His tone made it clear this wasn't a suggestion. Slowly, the crowd began to disperse. Some people offered grudging congratulations. Others simply walked away, their disapproval evident in the set of their shoulders. But the immediate threat of confrontation had passed. "Come to the store," May said. "I'll get you fixed up with what you need, on credit if necessary. You can pay me back when you're settled." "That's generous," Calder said carefully. "But we can pay." "Didn't say you couldn't. Just offering, is all." May started walking toward her store, clearly expecting them to follow. "Now, you said you're heading west, California?" Nora and Calder exchanged glances. In the rush of the wedding, they hadn't actually discussed their immediate plans. California had been Nora's destination, but that was before Calder, before the proposal, before she'd become Mrs. Boone. "We haven't decided," Nora said honestly. "There are things we need to figure out first." "Well, figure them out quick. You don't want to be traveling with winter still fierce. Another big storm, and you'll be stuck here until spring." May pushed open the door to her store, and warmth spilled out along with the scent of coffee and dry goods. "Speaking of which, where are you staying tonight?" "We need to check on Mrs. Rowe first," Calder said. "Make sure she came through the surgery all right." "Agatha Rowe? She's the one Doc Morrison operated on this morning?" At their nods, May's expression softened. "Brave woman. I took her some soup about an hour ago. She was sleeping, but Doc said it went as well as could be expected. She'll need time to heal before she can travel, though. Weeks, probably." The news settled over them like a weight. Weeks. Which meant they couldn't leave immediately even if they wanted to. They'd need to stay in Clearwater, find work, find lodging, build a life here, at least temporarily. "We'll need a room then," Calder said. "Somewhere my wife and I can stay while Mrs. Rowe recovers." "My wife." The word sent a thrill through Nora every time he said them. "Mrs. Chen runs a boarding house 2 streets over. Clean rooms, fair prices, and she doesn't much care what color a man is as long as his money's good." May started pulling supplies from the shelves: flour, beans, salt pork, coffee. You'll need to bring your own linens, though, and probably some warmer clothes for your bride. Can't have her walking around in borrowed trousers forever, even if they do suit her. Nora looked down at her dress. Judith's blue wool, which she'd have to return. I have clothes. They were damaged in the crash, but they're serviceable. Let me see them. May's tone brooked no argument. When Nora described the tears and stains, the older woman shook her head. That won't do. A married woman needs decent clothing. I've got some fabric, and Mrs. Chen is handy with a needle. Between the two of us, we can get you fixed up proper. We can't afford... Didn't ask if you could afford it, asked if you needed it. May wrapped the supplies in brown paper, her movements brisk and efficient. My daughter was about your size before she married and moved to Denver. Left some dresses behind. They're just taking up space in my attic. You'd be doing me a favor taking them off my hands. That's very kind, Nora said, overwhelmed by the unexpected generosity. It's practical. Can't have Calder's wife walking around looking like a ragamuffin. Reflects poorly on him, and he's got enough strikes against him without adding that. May's voice was matter-of-fact, but there was warmth in her eyes. Now, you'll want to visit Mrs. Rowe, then get settled at the boarding house. Come back tomorrow, and I'll have those dresses ready for you. They left the store laden with supplies and a tentative sense of hope. Not everyone in Clearwater would accept them. That much was clear. But they weren't completely without allies either. It was more than Nora had expected, honestly. More than she'd feared they'd find. Dr. Morrison's office was quiet when they arrived. The doctor himself answered their knock, his sleeves still rolled up from the surgery. She's resting comfortably, he reported. The operation went well. I removed 3 toes from her left foot. Could have been worse. She was lucky you got her to warmth when you did, Mr. Boone. Another day and we'd be talking about the whole foot. Can we see her? Nora asked. Briefly. She needs her rest. He led them to a small room where Agatha lay propped on pillows, her face pale but peaceful. Her foot was heavily bandaged, elevated on a cushion. Agatha's eyes opened when they entered, and a weak smile crossed her face. Mrs. Boone, that has a nice ring to it. How are you feeling? Nora pulled a chair close to the bed, taking Agatha's hand. Like someone cut off my toes. But there was humor in her voice, fragile but present. Dr. Morrison gave me laudanum for the pain. Makes everything feel distant, like I'm floating. We're going to stay in town while you recover, Calder said from the doorway. Mrs. Chen has a boarding house. We'll be close by. You don't have to... We want to, Nora interrupted. You're not going through this alone. Besides, it'll give us time to figure out our next steps. Agatha squeezed her hand. Thank you, both of you. I don't know what I would have done without you. You saved my life too, Nora reminded her gently. If you hadn't insisted we couldn't leave each other in that storm, I might have given up. We survived together, remember? Together, Agatha echoed, her eyes already drifting closed. That's good. Together is good. They left her sleeping, the laudanum pulling her back under. Doctor. Morrison walked them to the door, his expression thoughtful. She'll need someone to check on her daily. Change the bandages, make sure there's no infection. I can do it, of course, but if you're staying in town, I'll do it, Nora said immediately. Just show me what needs to be done. You have any medical training? No, but I can learn. The doctor studied her for a moment, then nodded. All right, come by tomorrow morning. I'll teach you what you need to know. Mrs. Chen's boarding house was a 2-story structure badly in need of paint, but structurally sound. The proprietor herself was a tiny Chinese woman with steel-gray hair and sharp eyes that missed nothing. She looked them over when they arrived, her gaze lingering on their joined hands. Married? She asked in accented but clear English. This afternoon, Calder confirmed. We need a room, probably for a few weeks. 1 room or 2? 1. He colored slightly. We're married. I heard you. Want to know if you need 2 beds or 1? Mrs. Chen's expression remained neutral. Some married couples prefer separate beds. I don't judge. 1 bed is fine, Nora said, her own cheeks warming. Good. More practical anyway. Saves space, saves heat. Mrs. Chen led them up narrow stairs to a small room at the end of the hall. It was sparse. A bed, a washstand, a single chair, a small stove in the corner, but scrupulously clean. $2 a week, payable in advance. That includes breakfast. You want other meals? There's a restaurant down the street, or you can cook in the communal kitchen. Calder counted out the money from his worn leather purse. Nora saw how thin it was growing and felt a pang of worry. They'd need to find work, and soon. There's a bathhouse out back, Mrs. Chen continued, handing Calder a key. Hot water costs extra. You share the kitchen with the other boarders, 5 men who work at the lumber mill, and a widow woman who does washing. Rules are simple. Keep your room clean. No fighting, no stealing, no drinking in the rooms. You break the rules, you leave. Understood? Understood, they said in unison. Mrs. Chen nodded, satisfied. Welcome to Clearwater, Mr. and Mrs. Boone. Try not to cause too much trouble. When she'd gone, Nora and Calder stood in the middle of the small room, suddenly awkward with each other. The reality of their situation was sinking in. They were married, they were alone together for the first time, and neither of them quite knew what to do about it. I can sleep on the floor, Calder offered, if you'd prefer, until you're comfortable. We're married, Calder. We share a bed. Nora tried to sound confident, but her heart was racing. Though I should probably tell you, Charles and I never, we kissed a few times, but we never, I know what you mean. His ears had gone red. And we don't have to. Not tonight, not until you're ready. There's no rush. But she couldn't seem to finish a sentence. Once. A long time ago. It didn't mean anything, not like this. He took a step toward her, then stopped, as if afraid of moving too fast. Nora, I know this is all happening quick. We barely know each other in a lot of ways, so we take our time, all right? We learn each other. No pressure, no expectations. The knot in Nora's chest loosened slightly. Thank you for understanding. Always. He set their supplies on the small table, started unpacking with nervous energy. I should go see about finding work tomorrow. The lumber mill probably needs hands, or maybe one of the ranches. Winter work is scarce, but I'm not picky. I can work too. Maybe Mrs. Chen needs help, or May at the store. You don't have to. Yes, I do. We're partners, remember? That means we both contribute. Nora moved to the window, looking out at the darkening street. Besides, I need something to do besides worry about Agatha and feel awkward about sharing a bed with you. That startled a laugh out of him. Fair enough. Though for what it's worth, I'm plenty awkward about it too. Really? You seem so calm. I'm terrified. He came to stand beside her at the window. I'm married to the most beautiful, bravest woman I've ever met, and I have no idea how to be a good husband to her. All I know is ranching and surviving. I don't know how to... He gestured helplessly. How to do this. Whatever this is. Nora turned to face him, reaching up to touch his cheek. We figure it out together. That's how. He leaned into her touch, his eyes closing briefly. I love you. I know I haven't said it enough, but I do. From the moment I saw you in that storm, something in me knew. This is it. This is her. This is the person I've been waiting for. I love you too. The words felt both strange and natural, like speaking a language she'd always known but never had occasion to use. And I'm scared too, but I'd rather be scared with you than safe without you. He kissed her then, and this time there was no reverent watching, no need to maintain propriety. This kiss was deeper, more urgent, full of promise and question, and a heat that made Nora's breath catch. When they finally broke apart, they were both breathing hard. We should probably eat something, Calder said roughly, before I forget every good intention I have. They ate cold biscuits and cheese from their supplies, sitting side by side on the bed, their shoulders touching. They talked about practical things, where to look for work, how to budget their dwindling funds when they might be able to afford a place of their own. But underneath the practical talk was an electric awareness of each other, of the bed they were sitting on, of the night stretching ahead. Eventually, Calder excused himself to use the bathhouse. When he returned, hair damp and smelling of soap, Nora took her turn. She washed away days of travel and worry, emerging to find Calder had turned down the bed and was sitting in the chair by the stove, feeding it small pieces of wood. You can take the bed, he said without looking at her. I'll sit here a while longer. Calder. Come to bed. Her voice was steadier than she felt. Please. He looked at her then, and the hunger in his eyes made her shiver, but not with fear, with anticipation, with want. He stood slowly, crossed to the bed, and they lay down together fully clothed, careful not to touch at first. But the bed was narrow, and gradually they drifted closer until Nora was tucked against his side, her head on his shoulder, his arm around her. "Is this all right?" he murmured into her hair. "Yes." She felt his heart beating against her cheek, steady and strong. "This is perfect." They fell asleep like that, tangled together, safe in each other's arms. The days that followed developed their own rhythm. Each morning, Nora visited Dr. Morrison's office to help with Agatha's care, learning to change bandages and check for signs of infection. Agatha's recovery was slow but steady, and her spirits improved as the pain gradually lessened. They talked for hours while Nora worked, about Agatha's daughter Sarah and grandson Thomas, about Nora's new marriage, about the strange turns life took when you least expected them. "You're happy," Agatha observed one morning, watching Nora's face as she unwrapped the bandages. "Truly happy." "I am." Nora cleaned the surgical site carefully, relieved to see it was healing well. "It's strange. A month ago I was on a train fleeing Boston, convinced I'd ruined my life. Now I'm married to a man I barely know, stuck in a frontier town in winter, and I've never been happier. Sometimes what looks like ruin is actually salvation in disguise." Agatha winced as Nora applied fresh bandages. "I thought losing those toes was the worst thing that could happen. But you know what? It's freed me somehow. I can't run anymore. Can't pretend I'm still the strong, independent woman I was. I have to accept help, accept limits. And that's teaching me something I needed to learn." "What's that?" "That strength isn't about doing everything yourself. It's about knowing when to let others carry you." She smiled. "Like you and Calder are carrying me now. I'm grateful for it, even though my pride hates it." Nora finished the bandaging and sat back. "You've carried us too, you know. Your wisdom, your encouragement. You pushed me to be brave when I wanted to be cautious. That matters." "Then we're even." Agatha settled back against the pillows. "Now tell me, how's married life treating you?" Nora felt her cheeks warm. "It's an adjustment. We're still figuring each other out." "But he's good to you?" "So good it scares me sometimes. He's patient and kind, and he makes me laugh. He tells me about his day at the lumber mill, asks about mine. We cook together in Mrs. Chen's kitchen, and he helps me with dishes, even though half the men there look at him like he's crazy for doing woman's work." She paused, choosing her words carefully. "We haven't. That is, we're taking things slowly, but he holds me at night, and that's enough for now." "Smart man, building trust first." Agatha's eyes were knowing. "When you're ready, you'll know, and it'll be worth the wait." Calder had indeed found work at the lumber mill, brutal physical labor that left him exhausted by day's end. But he never complained, never suggested that Nora should stop working too. She'd taken a position helping May at the general store 3 days a week, organizing inventory, serving customers, learning the rhythms of frontier commerce. The work was simple but satisfying, and May proved to be excellent company, full of stories about Clearwater's history and its inhabitants. "You're good with people," May observed one afternoon as Nora helped a young mother select fabric for a dress. "Patient. You listen instead of just hearing." "My mother always said my real talent was making people comfortable enough to tell me things they shouldn't." Nora measured out the fabric, calculating the cost in her head. "I think she meant it as criticism, but I've always taken it as a compliment." "As well you should. It's a gift." May wrapped the fabric in paper, accepted payment from the grateful customer. "You ever think about teaching? Clearwater could use a proper school teacher. Mrs. Anderson does her best, but she's got her hands full with her own 6 children. I had a position waiting for me in California. Teaching was the plan, actually." "And now?" Nora looked out the store window at the snow-covered street, at the mountains rising in the distance. "Now I don't know. Calder and I haven't really discussed what happens after Agatha's well enough to travel, whether we'll stay here or move on." "You should discuss it. Can't build a life together if you're both pulling in different directions." May's tone was pragmatic rather than critical. "Though, if you want my opinion, you'd do well to stay. Town's growing. There'll be opportunities for a young couple willing to work hard." That evening, Nora brought it up with Calder. They were in their room at the boarding house, sitting together on the bed after supper. He was mending a tear in his work shirt, and she was darning socks. Domestic tasks that felt oddly comfortable. May asked me today if I'd thought about teaching here, in Clearwater. She kept her eyes on her work, suddenly nervous. What do you think about that? About staying here instead of going to California? Calder's hand stilled on the shirt. I'd stay anywhere you wanted to stay. California, Clearwater, Nebraska, doesn't matter to me as long as we're together. That's not an answer. What do you want? He was quiet for a long moment, considering. I want a place to put down roots. Build something that lasts. I've been drifting for years, working other men's ranches, living in other men's bunkhouses. He struggled for the words. I want a home. With you. Whether that's here or somewhere else, I don't care. But I want it to be ours. We can't afford much right now. Not yet. But give me a few years. Let me save up. There's land available east of here. Cheap because it's rough and needs work. But I could build a house, start a small herd, make something of it. Nora could hear the longing in his voice, see the dream taking shape. Tell me about it. This place you're imagining. So he did. He told her about a valley he'd seen last summer while tracking strays, sheltered from the worst winds, with a creek running year-round and good grazing land. He described the house he'd build there, starting small but with room to expand. A barn for horses and cattle, a garden plot for vegetables, maybe chickens, a milk cow, a life of honest work and simple pleasures. And if I wanted to teach, Nora asked, if we stayed here and I took a position at the school, then I'd be proud of you, support you however I could. He set aside his mending, turning to face her. Nora, I married you because I love who you are. Not who I think you should be, not some version of you that fits my plans. You want to teach? You teach. You want to homestead with me? We homestead. You want to do both somehow? We figure it out. That's what marriage means to me, building a life together, not forcing you into mine. She set down her darning and kissed him, pouring gratitude and love and promise into it. He responded immediately, pulling her closer, and for several minutes they forgot about socks and shirts and future plans. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Calder rested his forehead against hers. I want you, he said roughly. God, Nora, I want you so much it's killing me. But I won't rush you, won't push. I know. She traced the line of his jaw, feeling the rough stubble there. And I love you for it. But Calder, I think I'm ready. If you are. His eyes darkened. Are you sure? I'm sure. And she was. After 2 weeks of sleeping beside him, of learning his kindness and patience and strength, of building trust one moment at a time, she was sure. Make love to me, Calder. Make me your wife in truth. What followed was tender and awkward and occasionally clumsy, as first times often are. But it was also beautiful, full of whispered endearments and gentle touches and a connection that went deeper than physical pleasure. Afterward, they lay tangled together, the small stove casting flickering light across their skin, and Nora felt something settle into place inside her chest. This was right. This man, this moment, this life they were building together. I love you, she whispered against his shoulder. I love you too. His arms tightened around her. Thank you for trusting me, for choosing me. Always, she promised, from now until forever. 2 weeks later, Dr. Morrison declared Agatha well enough to travel, provided she took it slowly and kept weight off her injured foot. The day arrived with mixed emotions, joy at Agatha's recovery, sadness at the approaching goodbye. They gathered in her room at the doctor's office. Nora, Calder, Dr. Morrison, and Agatha herself, dressed in traveling clothes and leaning heavily on a cane. The stage leaves tomorrow morning, Agatha said, her voice thick with emotion. I'll be in California with Sarah and Thomas within 2 weeks. We'll take you to the stage, Nora said, blinking back tears. Make sure you get settled properly. Thank you, dear, for everything. You saved my life. You and Calder both. I'll never forget that. You saved mine too, Nora reminded her, in more ways than one. You helped me see what mattered, helped me be brave enough to choose it. Agatha pulled her into a fierce embrace. Promise me you'll write. Let me know how you're doing, you and this handsome cowboy of yours. I promise. And you write too. Tell us all about Thomas and Sarah and your new life in California. They spent Agatha's last evening in Clearwater at Mrs. Chen's boarding house, sharing a meal in the communal kitchen. May came by with fresh bread, and Reverend Hayes and his wife brought preserves. Even Mrs. Chen contributed, dumplings made according to her mother's recipe, delicate and delicious. It was a simple feast, but rich in fellowship and affection. As the evening wore on, Agatha grew tired, and Calder helped her back to Dr. Morrison's office. Nora walked beside them through streets transformed by approaching spring. The snow was melting, revealing patches of brown earth. The air had lost its bitter edge, and birds were beginning to return to the eaves of buildings. "Spring's coming," Calder observed. "Another few weeks and winter will be just a memory." "Will you miss it?" Nora asked. "The winter, I mean." He looked at her, and his smile was soft in the twilight. "I'll remember it fondly. Best winter of my life, despite everything. Or maybe because of everything." The next morning dawned clear and mild. They arrived at the stage station early, helping Agatha settle her few belongings. The driver, a different man than Orrin, thank God, loaded her trunk with careful efficiency. Other passengers began to arrive, nodding politely to Agatha and eyeing Nora and Calder with varying degrees of curiosity and judgment. When the call came to board, Agatha hugged them both one final time. "Be happy," she whispered fiercely. "Be so happy that when you're old like me, you look back with no regrets." "We will," Nora promised, tears streaming down her face. "Safe travels, Agatha. Give Sarah and Thomas our love." They watched the stage pull away, dust rising in its wake. Nora leaned against Calder, his arms solid around her shoulders. They stood there long after the stage had disappeared from view, neither quite ready to move. "She's going to be fine," Calder said finally. "Strong woman like that, she'll probably outlive us all." "I hope so." Nora wiped her eyes. "I'm going to miss her." "Me too, but she's going home. That's what matters." He turned to face her, taking both her hands in his. "Now it's our turn, to figure out what home means for us, to build it, together. I've been thinking about that valley you described, the one with the creek." Nora looked up at him, her decision made. "Let's go see it. When the weather clears enough for travel, see if it's as good as you remember." Hope blazed in his eyes. "Really? You'd want that? Living out there, away from town?" "I'd want you. The rest is just details." She squeezed his hands. "Besides, May says the school board is talking about building satellite schools in the outlying areas as more families homestead. Maybe I could teach after all, just from our own home, traveling to students instead of them coming to me." "That could work. That could really work." He swept her up, spinning her around right there in the street, laughing with pure joy. Several passers-by stared, but neither of them cared. "We'll make it work. Whatever it takes, we'll make it work." That afternoon, they visited the land office to inquire about available homesteads. The clerk, a bored-looking man with ink-stained fingers, pulled out maps and land plats, showing them options. Most were too far out, too rough, or already claimed. But then he found one that made Calder go still, his finger tracing the boundaries with wonder. "This one," he said. "Right here. This is the valley I told you about." The clerk squinted at the notation. 160 acres available under the Homestead Act. You'd need to build a dwelling, cultivate the land, live there for 5 years to prove up. Think you can handle that?" "Yes," they said together, and the clerk's eyebrows rose slightly at their certainty. "All right then. I'll need proof of citizenship. You got that?" Calder produced papers, his father's name on them, establishing his legal status despite his mixed heritage. Nora showed her own documents from Boston. The clerk processed everything with bureaucratic efficiency, and within an hour they walked out of the land office with a claim certificate and the first real piece of their future. "We're landowners," Nora said, staring at the paper in disbelief. "We actually own land." "We will once we prove up, 5 years from now, if we've met all the requirements." Calder folded the certificate carefully, tucking it into his pocket. "But yeah, we're landowners. Or we will be." They celebrated that night in their room at Mrs. Chen's, making love with the certificate propped on the chair like a blessing, like a promise. And afterward, lying in the darkness with Nora's head on his chest, Calder talked about everything they'd do, the house they'd build, not fancy, but sturdy and well-made, the crops they'd plant, the cattle they'd raise, a life measured in seasons and hard work, and the satisfaction of building something that would last. Our children will grow up there, he said quietly, if we're blessed with them. They'll know that land, know every rock and tree. They'll understand what it means to work for something, to earn it. Children, Nora tested the word, found she liked the weight of it. I'd like that. A few years from now, maybe, once we're established. However many you want, or none, if that's your choice. Either way, I'm happy. His hand stroked her hair, gentle and reverent. Because I've got you. Everything else is just extra. Spring advanced rapidly after that, as if the land had been waiting for permission to burst into life. Snow melted into streams, then rivers. Grass pushed up through the mud, achingly green. Birds returned in force, filling the air with song. And Nora and Calder made their preparations, saving every penny, gathering supplies, planning their move to the homestead. May was sorry to see Nora leave the store, but she understood. She threw them a going-away party, inviting everyone who'd shown them kindness during their stay in Clearwater. Reverend Hayes offered a blessing over their new home. Dr. Morrison gave them a medical kit, basic supplies and instructions for handling common ailments. Mrs. Chen presented them with a set of dishes, practical and sturdy. You come back if things get hard, she said firmly. Room will be here. No shame in needing help sometimes. Thank you, Nora said, embracing the tiny woman, for everything, for making us feel welcome. You made yourselves welcome. You worked hard, caused no trouble, paid your bills. Mrs. Chen's expression was as close to warm as it ever got. That's all anyone can ask. On their last night in town, unable to sleep with excitement and nerves, Nora and Calder walked the quiet streets one final time. They passed the general store where she'd worked, the doctor's office where Agatha had recovered, the church where they'd been married. Each place held memories now, moments woven into the fabric of their story. Are you scared? Nora asked, her hand tight in his. Terrified, Calder admitted. What if I can't make it work? What if I fail you? You won't. We won't. She stopped, turned to face him under the stars. We survived a blizzard that should have killed us. We built a marriage out of nothing but courage and hope. We can do this, Calder. Together, we can do anything. He kissed her there in the middle of the street, under stars that blazed with impossible brightness, and Nora felt the last of her doubts burn away. Tomorrow they'd leave Clearwater behind and head to their valley, their land, their future. It wouldn't be easy. There would be hard times, setbacks, moments of doubt, but they would face it together, and that made all the difference. They set out at first light with everything they owned loaded into a borrowed wagon, tools, supplies, seeds for planting, the dishes from Mrs. Chen, blankets and clothing, and hope bundled together with rope. Calder drove while Nora sat beside him, watching Clearwater disappear behind them as the sun climbed higher. The road east was rough, barely more than wagon ruts through prairie grass. But the morning was beautiful, and the promise of their future made every jolt and bump feel like progress. The valley appeared before them in late afternoon, and Nora's breath caught at the sight of it. Calder had described it well, a sheltered bowl of land cradled between rolling hills, with a creek cutting through the center like a silver ribbon. The grass was thick and green, dotted with wildflowers just beginning to bloom. A stand of cottonwoods marked the creek's path, and beyond them the land rose gently toward the tree line. It's beautiful, she whispered. It's ours. Calder's voice was thick with emotion. He guided the wagon down into the valley, stopping near the creek where the ground was level and solid. This is where we'll build, close enough to water but high enough that spring floods won't reach us. They spent the rest of the daylight hours unloading the wagon, stacking supplies under a canvas tarp weighted with rocks. That night, they slept under the stars, wrapped in blankets with the sound of the creek singing them to sleep. Nora had never felt so small and so significant at once. A tiny human presence in vast wilderness, yet somehow exactly where she belonged. The work began in earnest the next morning. Calder had built structures before, knew what needed to happen in what order. First, they needed a temporary shelter while they worked on the house, something quick and weatherproof. He showed Nora how to cut and stack sod, creating thick walls that would hold warmth. They worked side by side, their hands blistering despite gloves, their backs aching by evening. But by the end of the third day, they had a small soddy, windowless and dark, but dry and surprisingly warm. "It's not much," Calder said, surveying their work with a critical eye. "It's ours," Nora echoed his words from their first day. "And it's honest work. I'm proud of it." They celebrated that night with a hot meal cooked over their first fire in their own hearth. Simple beans and cornbread, but it tasted like victory. Afterward, lying together in the darkness of their soddy, Nora felt Calder's hand find hers. "Thank you," he said quietly. "For what?" "For not being afraid of this, of hard work and uncertainty and a life that's going to be rough for a while." His thumb traced circles on her palm. "Most women wouldn't choose this, wouldn't choose me. Most women are fools then." She rolled toward him, finding his face in the darkness. "I chose you because you're worth choosing. And this life? Yes, it's hard. But it's real. It's ours. That's worth every blister and aching muscle." He kissed her then, and she felt his gratitude in it, his wonder that she was here with him. They made love in their humble soddy with the smell of earth all around them, and Nora thought that she had never been happier in any fancy Boston bedroom than she was here in this rough shelter they'd built with their own hands. The weeks that followed fell into a rhythm of relentless work. They woke with the sun and worked until darkness forced them to stop. Calder taught Nora everything: how to fell trees and strip them for building, how to notch logs so they'd fit together tight, how to mix mud for chinking. Her hands grew calloused, her arms strong. She stopped worrying about her appearance, about propriety, about anything except the task in front of her. Sometimes Calder would return from hunting with fresh meat, and they'd feast like royalty on venison or rabbit. Other times their meals were spare, just bread and whatever vegetables they could forage. But they never went hungry, and they never went to bed angry with each other. They learned to work as a team, to anticipate each other's needs, to communicate with looks and gestures when words weren't necessary. One morning in early summer, Nora woke with nausea rolling through her stomach. She barely made it outside before losing what little she'd eaten the night before. Calder was at her side immediately, holding her hair back, his hand gentle on her shoulder. "Are you sick? Should I ride to Clearwater for the doctor?" "No." Nora wiped her mouth, her mind racing through calculations. When had her monthly courses last come? She'd been so busy with work that she'd barely noticed they'd stopped. "No, I don't think I'm sick. I think I'm... Calder, I think I'm pregnant." He went very still. "Pregnant? You mean a baby?" "Yes, a baby." She turned to look at him, suddenly uncertain. They'd talked about children eventually, but this was sooner than planned, much sooner. "I know we said we'd wait a few years, get established first, but nothing." His face had transformed, wonder replacing shock. "A baby! We're having a baby!" He pulled her into his arms, holding her like she was made of glass. "God, Nora, are you happy? Tell me you're happy." "I'm terrified," she admitted against his chest. "We're barely surviving as it is, and now there'll be 3 of us. What if... We'll make it work. Whatever it takes, we'll make it work." He pulled back to look at her, his hands framing her face. "You're going to be an amazing mother, and our child is going to grow up knowing they were wanted, loved, fought for. That's more than most kids get." Tears spilled down Nora's cheeks, hormones maybe, or relief, or just the overwhelming emotion of it all. "A winter baby, the doctor said Agatha would have. Ours will be too, probably. Born right here in this valley. Then we better have the house finished by then." Calder kissed her forehead, her cheeks, her lips. "And I better build a cradle. And we need more supplies, more food stored up. A baby changes everything." He was right. The pregnancy added urgency to their work, but it also forced them to be smarter about it. Calder wouldn't let Nora lift heavy logs anymore, wouldn't let her work in the heat of midday. He became almost comically protective, fussing over her meals and her rest, and whether she was drinking enough water. It should have been annoying, but Nora found it endearing instead. This rough cowboy who'd survived blizzards and frontier hardship was reduced to nervous hovering by the prospect of fatherhood. By late summer, the house was taking shape, a solid log cabin with 2 rooms, a proper fireplace, and real windows that Calder had traded for in Clearwater. It wasn't finished yet, but it was close enough that they could move out of the soddy and into something that felt like an actual home. Nora planted a small garden near the house, coaxing vegetables from the soil with determination and hope. Calder built furniture in the evenings, a table, chairs, a bed frame that didn't creak. One evening in August, as they sat on the porch Calder had just finished building, watching the sunset paint the valley in shades of gold and rose, Nora heard hoofbeats approaching. They both tensed. Visitors were rare and not always welcome, but the rider who appeared over the rise was familiar, his young face drawn with something that might have been shame or fear, or both. Orrin Winters reined in his horse 50 feet from the house, as if uncertain of his welcome. Calder stood slowly, and Nora felt the tension radiating off him in waves. "Orrin," Calder said flatly. "Didn't expect to see you here. Can we talk?" Orrin dismounted, his movements jerky with nerves. "I know I got no right to ask, but you're right, you don't." Calder's voice was cold in a way Nora had never heard before. "You left them to die. 2 women, one of them half-conscious, and you took the horses and ran." "I know." Orrin's face crumpled. "God, Calder, I know. I panicked. The storm was so bad, and I thought if I could just get to you, you'd know what to do. You always know what to do." "So you left them." "I'm sorry. I'm so goddamn sorry." Orrin was crying now, tears streaming down his face. "I've been living with it for months. Can't sleep, can't eat. Every time I close my eyes, I see them. See her." He looked at Nora. "You probably hate me. You should hate me." Nora stood, moving to stand beside Calder. She studied Orrin, this boy who'd almost killed her through cowardice and panic. She should hate him, should want him gone, want him punished. But all she felt was a weary pity for someone who'd made a terrible choice and was drowning in the consequences. "I should hate you," she said quietly. "But I don't. I'm angry, yes. What you did was unforgivable, but hating you won't change what happened. Won't give back the fear or the cold or watching Agatha nearly die." "I know." Orrin wiped his face with his sleeve. I needed to say it. Needed you to know I'm sorry, and I wanted to." He pulled an envelope from his coat. "This came to the stage office in Omaha. Letter from California, addressed to you." Nora took it with shaking hands. The return address was Sarah Whitmore's, Agatha's daughter. She broke the seal, unfolding pages covered in neat handwriting. "Read it aloud," Calder said, his hand finding hers. So she did, her voice trembling at first, then growing stronger. Sarah wrote about her mother's arrival, about how Agatha had told them everything, the storm, the crash, the rescue. How 3 toes seemed a small price to pay for being alive, for getting to hold her grandson and see her daughter again. She wrote about Agatha's recovery, about how she was learning to walk with a cane, how she was teaching little Thomas his letters, and at the end, Sarah had written something that made Nora's throat close with emotion. "My mother says you saved her life twice, once from the cold and once from giving up. She says she thinks of you daily and prays for your happiness. She wanted you to know that she made it, that she's home, and that every moment with Thomas is a gift she owes to your courage. Please write when you can. We want to know how you are, how your marriage is, how your life in Nebraska is unfolding. You and Mr. Boone will always have family in California if you need it. With deepest gratitude and affection, Sarah Whitmore." Nora folded the letter carefully, pressing it to her chest. Agatha was happy, was home. The knowledge settled something inside her that had been unsettled since they'd watched the stage pull away. "She forgave me too," Orrin said quietly. "Mrs. Rowe. She wrote to the stage company, told them what happened, said she didn't want me prosecuted, that I was young and scared and people make mistakes." "That's more than you deserve," Calder said, but some of the hardness had left his voice. "I know." Orrin looked at the ground. "I quit the stage line. Couldn't do it anymore after everything. Been working at a ranch near Omaha, trying to, I don't know, be better, I guess." Be the kind of man who doesn't run when things get hard. Calder was quiet for a long moment, and Nora could see the war happening inside him. Anger versus mercy, justice versus forgiveness. Finally, he sighed. You want to be better? Then be better. Don't just talk about it. He gestured at the valley around them. I've got 160 acres here that need working. House to finish, land to clear, crops to plant. I could use help. And you owe us, a debt that's going to take a long time to repay. Oren's head snapped up, hope flickering in his eyes. You mean you'd let me stay? Work with you? I mean, I'm giving you a chance to make amends. You work hard, you earn your keep, you prove you're not the same coward who ran into that storm. Do that and maybe, we can be brothers again someday. I won't let you down. Oren's voice was fierce with promise. I swear to God, Calder, I won't let you down again. See that you don't. Calder looked at Nora. Assuming my wife agrees, this is her home too. Nora thought about it, about whether she wanted Oren here, a reminder of the worst night of her life. But she also thought about Calder's mother, about the lessons she'd taught her son about kindness and second chances, about how holding on to anger only poisoned the holder. He can stay, she said finally. But Oren, you understand this isn't forgiveness. Not yet. You have to earn that. I understand, and I will. However long it takes, I will. They put Oren to work immediately, and he threw himself into it with desperate energy. He worked sunrise to sunset, never complaining, always asking what needed doing next. He was deferential with Nora, calling her ma'am and keeping his distance, clearly terrified of overstepping. With Calder, he was carefully respectful, watching his brother with something like worship mixed with guilt. The dynamic was awkward at first, the three of them navigating around the weight of what had happened. But slowly, as summer faded into autumn and the work continued, things began to ease. Oren proved himself capable and willing, if not particularly skilled. He learned quickly, though, soaking up everything Calder taught him with fierce concentration. And gradually, carefully, the brothers began to rebuild something that resembled a relationship. He's trying, Nora observed one evening after Oren had retired to the small tent he'd set up near the barn. Really trying. He is. Calder pulled her closer on the porch, his hand resting on her swelling belly. Doesn't mean I trust him yet, but he's earning his way back one day at a time. That's all anyone can ask. The baby kicked, and they both felt it. Calder's face transformed with wonder every time, no matter how many times it happened. Strong, he murmured. Going to be a fighter, this one. Takes after both parents, then. Nora covered his hand with hers. We're going to be all right, aren't we? The three of us. 4, counting Oren, I suppose. We're going to be better than all right. We're going to be happy. He kissed her temple. I promise you that, Nora. Whatever it takes, I'm going to spend the rest of my life making sure you're happy. The first snow came in early November, light and gentle, as if winter was testing its welcome. By then the house was finished, tight and warm, with glass in the windows and a door that hung straight. Calder had built a cradle from cottonwood, smooth and strong, and placed it near the fireplace where it would stay warm. Nora had sewn tiny clothes from fabric May had given them, each stitch a prayer for the life growing inside her. She'd grown large and ungainly, her belly enormous, her back aching constantly. Simple tasks left her breathless, but she'd never felt more alive, more purposeful. This child, this impossible gift born from a storm and survival and a love that had defied every odd, was almost here. The contractions started on a cold December morning while Nora was kneading bread. She felt the first one like a band tightening around her middle, stealing her breath. The second came 20 minutes later, stronger. By the third, she knew. Calder, she called, trying to keep her voice calm. It's time. He appeared in the doorway, his face going pale. Time? You mean the baby? The baby. For a moment he stood frozen. Then training took over. All those years of ranching, of dealing with livestock birthing, of staying calm in crisis. Oren, he shouted, ride to Clearwater. Get Mrs. Chen. Tell her the baby's coming. Mrs. Chen knows midwifery? Nora asked, breathing through another contraction. Her mother was a midwife. She's helped with births before. Calder was helping her to the bed, his hands shaking but his voice steady. You're going to be fine. The baby's going to be fine. Everything's going to be fine. You're trying to convince yourself, not me, Nora said with a weak laugh. Maybe, but I need to believe it. He gripped her hand as another contraction hit. Breathe. Just breathe. Orrin rode hard, reaching Clearwater in record time. Mrs. Chen came back with him in a wagon loaded with supplies, her face calm and competent. She took over the situation with quiet authority, sending the men outside and setting about her work with practiced efficiency. First baby? She asked Nora, checking her progress. Yes. Could be quick, could be long. No way to know. Mrs. Chen's hands were gentle despite her brusque manner. But you're strong. You'll manage. It was long. Hours of labor that blurred together in waves of pain and effort. Mrs. Chen stayed with her throughout, offering encouragement and instruction. Outside, Nora could hear Calder pacing, his boots wearing tracks in the frozen ground. Once she heard him and Orrin talking in low voices, and she smiled through her pain thinking about the brothers keeping vigil together. As night fell and the contractions grew closer together, harder, Nora began to understand what Agatha had meant about strength not being about doing everything yourself. She couldn't do this alone. She needed Mrs. Chen's guidance, needed Calder's presence, even though he was outside, needed every ounce of will and courage she possessed. Push now, Mrs. Chen commanded. Hard as you can. Nora pushed, bearing down with everything she had. Once, twice, 3 times, and then, incredibly, miraculously, a baby's cry split the air. A girl, Mrs. Chen announced, wrapping the infant in clean cloths. Perfect. 10 fingers, 10 toes, good strong lungs. A girl, Nora echoed, tears streaming down her face. Can I? Mrs. Chen placed the baby in her arms, and Nora looked down at her daughter's face, red and wrinkled and absolutely beautiful. The baby had Calder's blue eyes and what looked like it might be Nora's dark hair. She was tiny and perfect and real. Calder, Mrs. Chen called toward the door. Come meet your daughter. He burst in, his face wild with worry that transformed to wonder when he saw them. He approached the bed slowly, reverently, as if afraid he might break something. When he looked down at the baby, at his daughter, his eyes filled with tears. She's perfect, he whispered. God, Nora, she's perfect. You're perfect. We made her, Nora said, still marveling at it. This beautiful thing. We made her together. Calder sat on the edge of the bed, his finger gently touching the baby's tiny hand. She gripped it immediately, her whole fist barely big enough to wrap around his calloused finger. The sight of it, this rough cowboy reduced to trembling joy by his newborn daughter, made Nora's heart feel too big for her chest. What do we name her? Calder asked. They'd discussed names, of course, but somehow all those discussions felt inadequate now that the baby was real, was here. Nora thought about everything that had brought them to this moment, the storm, the survival, the people who'd helped them. Hope, she said finally. Her name is Hope, because that's what carried us through. Hope that we'd survive. Hope that we'd find each other. Hope that we could build this life. Hope, Calder repeated, testing it. Hope Boone. I like it. I love it. He leaned down to kiss Nora's forehead. Thank you, for her, for this, for everything. Mrs. Chen gave them privacy after ensuring both mother and baby were healthy and settled. She'd stay the night, she announced, just to make sure there were no complications. Orrin peeked in briefly, his face awed and a little scared at the sight of the tiny infant, then retreated to give them space. That night, Nora lay in bed with Hope nursing at her breast, and Calder beside her, his arm around them both. The fire crackled in the hearth, warming the room. Outside, snow fell softly, blanketing the valley in white, and in that moment, Nora felt a completeness she'd never known existed. Do you ever think about that night? She asked quietly. The storm? Every day, Calder admitted. Sometimes I wake up in the middle of the night, terrified it was all a dream, that I'm going to open my eyes and you'll be gone, that this was just... He gestured at the room, at hope, at their life. That none of it was real. It's real. We're real. She leaned into him, careful not to disturb the nursing baby. And we earned it, Calder. Every bit of it. We survived something that should have killed us, and we built something beautiful from it. We did. His hand stroked Hope's downy head. And we're going to keep building. This is just the beginning. Winter settled in properly after Hope's birth, but it lacked the terror of that first storm. They were prepared now, house tight, food stored, animals sheltered. Orrin proved invaluable during those months, taking over the heavy chores while Calder helped with the baby and Nora recovered. The arrangement worked surprisingly well, the three adults falling into a domestic rhythm that felt almost natural. In February, a letter arrived from Agatha. Sarah had written it at her mother's dictation, Agatha's hands being too stiff with arthritis to hold a pen properly anymore. She congratulated them on Hope's birth, said she wished she could be there to meet her. She wrote about Thomas, now learning to read, and about Sarah's new pregnancy. She wrote about the California sunshine and the orange trees in her daughter's yard. And at the end, she wrote something that made Nora cry. Tell Calder and Nora that I think of that storm as the worst thing that ever happened to me. Yes, I lost 3 toes. Yes, I thought I was going to die. But I also found 2 people who showed me what real courage looks like, who reminded me that family isn't always blood. Sometimes it's the people who show up in the storm and refuse to let you give up. They gave me back my life, and I'll be grateful for that until my last breath. All my love, Agatha. We should visit her, Calder said, reading over Nora's shoulder. When Hope's old enough to travel, take her to California, let Agatha meet her. I'd like that. Nora folded the letter carefully. Though I think she'd like it here too. The valley in summer, the wildflowers, the creek. It's beautiful in a way California never could be. Because it's ours. Because it's ours, she agreed. Spring arrived with a rush of new life. The creek swelled with snowmelt. Wildflowers carpeted the meadows. Birds returned, filling the air with song. And Hope, their winter baby, grew strong and healthy, her personality emerging more each day. She was curious and determined, already trying to roll over, to grab everything in reach, to be part of the world around her. Nora began teaching again in April, just as she'd imagined. Several homesteading families had settled within riding distance, and they were desperate for education for their children. She held classes twice a week in the cabin, teaching reading and arithmetic and history to a dozen students ranging from 5 to 15. Calder built extra benches for the students, and Orrin helped construct a small schoolhouse on their property for when the weather turned cold again. It wasn't the prestigious teaching position in California she'd once dreamed of. It was better. These children needed her in a way city children never would have. These families valued education because they understood what it meant to be without it. And Nora discovered that teaching was more rewarding when it came with genuine appreciation rather than entitled expectation. On a warm June evening, the valley full of green and gold light, Calder and Nora sat on their porch watching Hope play in the grass under Orrin's watchful eye. The baby was crawling now, exploring everything with determined enthusiasm. Orrin was surprisingly good with her, patient and playful, and Nora had finally reached the point where she trusted him with her daughter. You've forgiven him, Calder observed, watching her watch them. Mostly. She took his hand, lacing their fingers together. He's proven himself. Every day for 7 months he's proven himself. That counts for something. It does. Calder squeezed her hand. My mother would be proud of you. Of us. For building this, for choosing mercy over anger. Do you think she knows, somehow? I like to think so. Like to think she's watching from wherever she is, seeing her grandson. He stopped, corrected himself with a smile. Seeing her granddaughter grow up in this valley, seeing that I'm happy, that I found someone who sees me the way you do. Nora looked at him. This man who'd saved her from a storm, who'd offered her his heart before he even knew if she'd accept it, who'd built a life for them with his own scarred hands. She thought about the scared woman on that stage, running from one failed life toward an uncertain future. That woman couldn't have imagined this, the peace, the purpose, the profound rightness of being exactly where she was meant to be. I love you, she said, the words inadequate but true. more than I knew it was possible to love someone. I love you too." He pulled her close, and they sat like that as the sun set over their valley, painting everything in shades of amber and rose. Hope's laughter rang out as Orrin made faces at her, and smoke rose from their chimney, and the creek sang its eternal song. This was home. Not Boston with its society and rules, not California with its promise of independence. This rough valley in Nebraska. This cabin built by hand. This life earned through courage and choice, and an impossible love born in a blizzard. The storm that had nearly killed her had delivered her instead to exactly where she needed to be. And every day since had been a gift. Not always easy, not always comfortable, but always real, always meaningful, always theirs. As darkness fell and stars emerged overhead, Calder lifted Hope into his arms, and the three of them went inside together, father, mother, daughter. Orrin banked the fire in the outdoor pit and headed to his small cabin, whistling softly. And the valley settled into night, peaceful and full of promise, holding their lives with gentle permanence. Years from now, Nora would sit on this same porch with grandchildren at her feet and tell them the story. About the storm that swallowed the world. About the stagecoach driver who abandoned them. About the cowboy who found them half frozen and refused to let them die. About a love that bloomed impossibly in the coldest winter, growing into a life neither of them had dared to dream of. But tonight, she simply held her husband's hand and listened to their daughter's breathing as she fell asleep, and felt grateful beyond measure that she'd been brave enough to step onto that stage all those months ago. Brave enough to leave safety behind. Brave enough to choose love over caution, partnership over independence, this wild, beautiful, difficult life over any easier alternative. The storm had not ended them. It had delivered them to each other, and that made all the difference.